One day, the world was engulfed in a catastrophe of terrifying proportions, leading to its end. Horrible monsters, who wanted to devour humanity, burst out of oblivion and began to destroy everything around them. And if some creatures could still be somehow killed by a well-coordinated group, then others inspired such horror that any attempts ended in failure, turning into a mountain of corpses. And some monsters were so powerful that they burned out souls with just one look at their enemy. The people fought as desperately as they could, but over time, hope left each of them. However, in contrast to the horror brought about by the monsters, a stargate appeared from oblivion, returning hope to humanity. Those people who were not deprived of talent had a chance to enter these gates and gain incredible abilities that allowed them to retake the world from powerful monsters. The world had been holding firm for many years, and one of the strongest strongholds of humanity was the City of Dawn, whose territory witnessed tragic events that day. Robert Guardian was kicked into the backyard of his own home. Rising to one knee, Robert cursed his adopted brother, reproaching him for his betrayal. Darren stood in the doorway with the Guardian family's personal lawyer, smirking at Robert as he sat in the dust. A man dressed in a classic suit stepped forward, casting a haughty glance at Robert and explaining that because Robert had not awakened his abilities by the age of 18, he was legally no longer allowed to live in the awakened community. Robert was shocked to hear that Darren, as a child adopted by the Guardian family, had the right to take Robert's home for his own use. And although Robert tried to prove his case by mentioning those who, despite being of legal age, did not have abilities, he was again hit for his insolence. Robert fell backwards to the ground, barely hearing himself being condemned for not believing in the city laws. Having collected his papers, the lawyer prepared to leave, leaving the right to deal with Robert to Darren. Robert looked up and noticed the man's sly gaze directed at Darren and barely heard him mention a certain promise Darren had made. Smiling warmly at the lawyer, the guy said goodbye to him, guaranteeing that he would fulfill his promise. However, as soon as the man stepped out of the gate, at that very moment, a kick knocked Robert to the ground again. Having brazenly knocked the guy down, Darren put his foot on his head, pressing him to the ground and preparing to reveal the biggest surprises to him. Laughing at his defeated brother, the fair-haired man admitted that he had been poisoning Robert since he was 10 years old, which is why he was unable to awaken. It turned out that Darren had planned to deal with Robert in order to take complete and utter possession of all his property, which would ensure his prosperity and security for the rest of his life. Furious at his brother, Robert tried to get up and deal with the villain. However, Darren hit the guy with another terrible piece of news, which he planned to completely knock him off his feet. It turned out that Darren lied to the boy's parents about their last expedition, saying that it was there that they would find a way to help Robert wake up. But desperately wanting to carry it out, the parents died. Realizing that it was his brother who was responsible for the death of his parents, Robert fell into despair, kneeling right in front of the evilly grinning Darren. Having finally decided to put an end to this matter, the fair-haired man again sent the guy to the ground with a kick and ordered him to get lost. Without looking up in sadness, Robert stood up and walked out the gate. When the guy took a few steps away from the house, he turned around and looked at Darren with a withering gaze, threatening in a breaking voice that he would return and definitely take revenge for himself and his family. However, as soon as he turned away, his brother created a poisonous dart in his hands and quietly threw it at Robert's neck. Looking at the latter with contempt, Darren was sure that he would never see his loser brother again. After leaving home, Robert wandered around the city for several hours without any plans, but with each step the strength left his body. The poison spread throughout the boy's body, poisoning his body and killing his mind, causing the boy to stumble in an instant. Breathing heavily and trying to crawl along the ground, Robert swore in a hoarse whisper that he would definitely take revenge. But in the end, he closed his eyes and lost consciousness, regretfully realizing that he would not wake up again. At that moment, the clouds above the head of the guy lying on the ground thickened, and a light lit up in the very center of them. A second later, a column of flame shot through the sky at incredible speed, rushing towards the ground. And when it reached the ground, the flame hit right on the head of the lying Robert. Surprisingly, the flames did not burn the body, but enveloped it like a blanket, shimmering on the skin and clothes until they went out. At that very moment, the boy opened his eyes, returning to life. When he rose to his knee, the first thing that came out of his mouth was the statement that the reincarnation technique had worked. It turns out that at the same time that Robert was learning about Darren's betrayal, somewhere in heaven, the god warrior Adrian himself became a victim of betrayal. The thief goddess. Milia struck him in the back with a mighty sword, causing the mighty warrior to fall to his knees in confusion as to why his comrades were doing this to him. Amazed at his ignorance, his former comrades condemned God for wanting to oppose the demon god, considering the latter to be so powerful that it was impossible to imagine. Enraged by his comrades' disbelief, shouting that they had forgotten their own oath to protect humanity, Adrian grabbed the blade protruding from his chest with his hand. The power of his anger was so great that with one sharp movement, Adrian broke the blade into pieces, while screaming about the greed and selfishness of the other gods. In shock, they all froze, looking at the unwavering will of the one they had just accused of ignorance. Turning around, Adrian glared at his former friends, full of rage and condemnation. If they hadn't been stunned, they might have been able to finish off the god warrior, but Adrian, taking advantage of their confusion, created a rune circle on the ground beneath him, embodying the legendary reincarnation technique. The soul of Hadrian, having left the body of the great god, turned out to be that very pillar of flame that pierced the heavens and struck the body of poor Robert. Standing on both feet, Adrian analyzed the situation and realized one very unpleasant fact about his new body. Using his experience as a god warrior, Adrian quickly realized that his new body was poisoned to the point that every organ was irreversibly damaged. Stunned that his powerful spirit had been transferred to such a weak body, Adrian began to study Robert's memories to figure out what to do next. Images of all the tragic events that had happened to Robert, and in particular the fact of betrayal by his own brother, surfaced in his head. Adrian realized that his soul chose this particular body precisely because of the similarity of the tragic circumstances of death. Realizing that Robert's will before his death was incredibly strong, Adrian, feeling respect, vowed to fulfill this will at all costs. And as soon as he said this, Robert's soul appeared before his eyes in a golden flame, and having learned that his last wish was in safe hands, melted into thin air. And although Adrian made such a strong promise, he understood that because of the poison, Robert's body was too weak. But the great Hadrian would not have been a great god warrior in his past life if he had been afraid to take risks when there was almost no chance. Having reached into his own memories, Adrian began to search for what could help him cleanse his body and restore his former divine power. The answer was found almost instantly in the form of a secret technique that continues the path of the reincarnation technique, the 6 paths of reincarnation. Adrian understood that this technique would allow him to regain all the power he needed for his goals. But he also knew that before that, he needed to enter the Stargate in order to awaken. Gathering his strength, Adrian headed straight to the Stargate, wanting to become stronger as quickly as possible. It did not take him long to reach his goal and get to the gate, as it was visible from any street in the city. As he approached the area where the gate stood, Adrian thought about where he was and exhaled calmly, deciding that his former comrades would never find him in a new body. Before visiting the gate, the former god had to register, so he walked straight up to the counter, expressing his desire to undergo awakening to the man standing behind it. The man, however, addressing Adrian by the name of Roberta, made a displeased face and scornfully protested that he had already tried to wake up twice that month. However, having heard everything that was said, Adrian gave the man an angry look and demanded that he repeat it, only looking him in the eyes. The man was clearly taken aback by such changes in Robert's character, and therefore even lost the power of speech. The man was brought out of his stupor by a guard captain named Harold, who approached and wanted to know what had happened between them. While the man was reporting to the captain, Adrian used Robert's memories and learned that in the past, Captain Harold was saved by the boy's parents. Apparently, the captain was a man of honor, because upon hearing the man behind the counter's report, he immediately began to scold him, reminding him of how much the Guardian family had done for the city. Not hearing an answer from his subordinate, who hung his head in shame, Harold demanded a star map of awakening for Adrian. When he turned to the guy, Adrian saw not an angry grimace, but a warm smile, which caused quite pleasant emotions in the former god. But as soon as he took the card, Harold put his hand on the boy's shoulder and whispered that he should be more careful if he failed to awaken this time. And although the words were quite threatening, Adrian understood that they were said with concern for the son of the family that had once saved him. For this reason, Adrian saw off the departing captain with a grateful smile. Without delay, Adrian turned away from the reception desk and headed straight for the Stargate. Walking up, he pulled out the card Harold had given him and raised it above his head, whereupon it flew up and was immediately absorbed into the gate. Adrian, sighing before taking this important step, immediately followed. The boy's eyes were immediately covered with a golden haze, which melted away after a couple of seconds, revealing a huge open area full of others trying to wake up. Adrian tried to take a step, but immediately began to tremble with his whole body, because it was terribly difficult for the poisoned organism to withstand even the pressure of the place of awakening. The boy realized that it would be incredibly difficult for him to achieve awakening under such conditions. He looked to the side and saw one of the test subjects being hit by a bright pillar of light, the source of which was the star with which the person had entered into resonance. And he remembered that the more light from the star a person attracted, the greater the transformation his body would undergo. Turning his head to the other side, Adrian saw with regret the man who had fallen to his knees in despair, because he had not been able to enter into resonance with any star, and because of this, he would remain an ordinary person. Raising his head, Adrian used his god-warrior senses and noticed a star that his body could resonate with, but it was too weak to do so. The situation was dire, because even if the boy received the light of the star and could be reborn, the transformation would not be complete. However, Adrian would not have been a god-warrior in his past life if he had not been willing to take risks, and so he set about implementing the 6 paths of reincarnation technique by summoning as much spiritual flame as his past divine soul could. He used all the experience from his past life to make the flame bright and strong enough to cleanse his new body. The fiery silhouette grew stronger with each passing moment, engulfing Adrian in a heat that he did not notice. As the silhouette grew so hot that the flames could blind, the fire swirled around the boy's body, transforming it. At first, the movement of the flame was calm and measured, but in one moment it accelerated to the state of a fiery tornado. As the tornado began to dissipate, a rune circle formed underneath it, corresponding to the technique that Adrian, who was standing in the very center, was about to use. As if noticing the light of the flame below, the largest star, like the sun, lit up even brighter directly above Adrian. And a moment later, a pillar of her light pierced the heavens and rushed towards Adrian, who readily accepted it. His body seemed to melt in this light, transported to where his transformation was to continue. The light from the star with which Adrian's body entered into resonance turned out to be so strong and bright that the other test subjects looked at it in surprise, seriously believing that it was not the light of a star, but of the sun. At that moment, Adrian found himself in open space alone with the star that had chosen him. Her flame immediately engulfed Adrian's body, who was ready for this and tensed up, getting ready to curb it. The flames burned the guy's body painfully, ready to burn him if he lacked fortitude. However, in the furious outburst of emotions, Adrian endured the pain of the flames. His angry grin said more clearly than any words that he would endure any pain, just to achieve his goals. Eventually, the star's flame died out on Adrian's body, making it clear that he had harnessed its power, making him feel truly powerful. However, it turned out that the power of the technique he used summoned the light of more than one star, and another darker one appeared in front of Adrian. Her flame also engulfed the guy's body, but he readily accepted it and tamed it without much difficulty, after which he felt agile and fast. Having dealt with 2, he saw the third and immediately set about obtaining its power as well. The yellow flame gave in faster, and from it, Adrian felt his will and determination become even stronger. Next came the flame of a blue star, the harnessing of which seemed to open up a different perspective to his mind. The flame of the green star seemed to remove the veil from his eyes, and Adrian felt that nothing, not even the most microscopic, would escape his gaze. And finally, the last star, whose flame was bright purple, was also subject to Adrian's will, which is why his perception, according to his own feelings, became more specific. In the end, the 6 paths of reincarnation technique caused the flames of all 6 stars to surround the boy's body in a bizarre and bright vortex. The speed of this whirlwind was so great that from the outside its shape looked like a sphere. In this realm, Adrian entered a meditative state, synchronizing his own mind with the power of the stars and allowing it to have its full effect on his body. When Adrian felt the job was done, the sphere burst into 1,000 pieces. Renewed, powerful, and absolutely healthy, Adrian emerged, feeling his own omnipotence with every fiber of his body. The flame of one of the stars pliantly touched the guy's outstretched hand, which only confirmed his guess that the body was completely healed. At the same moment, A new, unusual runic circle was built behind Adrian, the symbols of which, however, were familiar to Adrian. Adrian knew that after awakening, the body would change in accordance with the acquired class. But at that moment, he felt not only how the warrior's power permeated his body, causing a feeling of incredible strength in his muscles. He also noticed that his movements had become smoother and his speed had clearly increased, which was consistent with the thief class. In addition, he became aware of everything around him and himself much more clearly and distinctly, which led him to conclude that the magician's insight was now open to him. In addition, his vision became so piercing that he could notice even the slightest vibration of the air around him, which made him realize that his vision had become equal to that of an experienced archer. And although the former god warrior's will was already unshakable, he clearly felt that it had become even sharper, causing him to be ready to immediately rush into battle, which usually characterizes the knight class. Having finally decided that this was it, Adrian was quite surprised that his perception had changed greatly, and therefore realized that even the qualities of the last class of summoner were now available to him. Adrian was absolutely shocked by the fact that he had discovered all 6 classes, because even in his past life, he had only heard of a couple of cases where someone had managed to discover a predisposition to several classes, and even then, no more than 2. Clenching his fists proudly, the boy grinned, realizing that in this case he would easily surpass even his past self. Looking up, he saw that the space around him was beginning to crumble, which meant that the awakening process would soon be over. At the same moment, Adrian, closing his eyes and opening them again, walked out of the Stargate back to the place from which he entered. And at the exit, he met the very thing he clearly did not want to see at all, because Darren was standing there, instantly attacking Adrian with contemptuous comments towards his, as it seemed to the blonde, absolutely useless attempts to wake up. Having looked angrily at the scoundrel, Adrian, not wanting to stand on ceremony, boldly sent the guy away. Darren was taken aback by this attitude from the one whom he had beaten with his own feet a few hours ago, and who now moved away from him as if the blonde wasn't worth the dirt under his fingernails. Rage immediately boiled in Darren's blood, not understanding how Robert, who had been poisoned by him, could walk like that now, as if nothing had happened. Outraged by this outcome, the fair-haired man pulled out his daggers and shouted at his brother, intending to finish off the impudent fellow that very second. Captain Harold's shout was heard from the gate, warning Darren not to do anything rash, and Adrian, hearing this, turned towards the attacker just in time. Using his thief-class skills, Darren quickly found himself right in front of Adrian, ready to plunge his blades into him. However, he was no match for the former god warrior with his vast combat experience, who saw through a ton of holes in the enemy's attack in the blink of an eye. Dodging the clumsy attack, Adrian lunged forward, thrusting his fist straight towards his opponent. As soon as he got close enough to Darren, his fist instantly hit the latter right in the jaw. Adrian's blow was so powerful that Darren was thrown back several meters. As Darren approached the wall, the people around him watched in shock as the two awakened fought, surprised that Adrian was able to knock his brother down. Flipping in midair, Darren twisted and landed on his feet, not understanding how it was possible that his poisoned brother could send him flying with one blow. And although he was ready to immediately rush at Adrian again, his appearance as a warrior ready for battle put the guy into a stupor. At that moment, Captain Harold appeared between the fighters, shouting at Darren. Harold glared at the blonde and heard him complain that the captain of the guard was being too indulgent towards the Guardian family's son and that he regretted that he hadn't been fired yet. An indignant Harold, looking at Darren with disdain, pointed out that anyone with 2 eyes could clearly see that Adrian was awake, which meant Darren had no right to attack him. And although Darren wanted to say something in response, he was distracted by the surprised exclamations of onlookers, who were amazed at how beautifully the newly awakened one had put the guy down with just one blow. Darren, indignant to the limit, looked at Adrian with anger, but he could do nothing about it. And so, without saying a word, he turned around and left. Grinning as he left, Harold walked up to Adrian and used his portable analyzer to find out what grade the boy had received. Looking at the screen, Harold saw the warrior's symbol and hastened to congratulate Adrian on this with all his heart. He noted that it now became clear how Adrian managed to send Darren flying with one blow. People who previously saw Adrian as a loser who couldn't wake up suddenly started smiling in front of him, admiring how coolly he had punched his stupid brother who decided to go for a frontal attack on the warrior. Adrian smiled at them, But in his mind, he was glad that he was able to hide the fact that he had unlocked more than one class by only showing the warrior class, because he was afraid that this feature might cause him difficulties. Harold put his hand on the boy's shoulder and, smiling warmly, congratulated Adrian again with all his heart. Taking the card out of the analyzer, Harold handed it to the guy, recommending that he quickly go to the Warrior Academy for training. Taking the card, Adrian looked at it and sighed with relief, promising to definitely try. However, to Harold's surprise, after putting the card away, Adrian asked the captain when the monthly talent evaluation would take place, to which the man replied that it would be today. And although Harold answered, he raised his shoulders in surprise, asking the boy if he was going to go to the assessment, having just woken up. Having received an affirmative answer, Harold again put his hand on the guy's shoulder and looked seriously into his eyes, speaking with the desire to keep him from doing anything rash. He said that immediately after awakening, people receive the status of a student and must go to the academy to participate in the talent assessment after 1 or 3 years. Usually only after training, an awakened can get a lifetime chance to obtain a class-related talent. Harold cautioned that this was indeed the only chance, and if a mistake was made during the test, the talent could turn out to be bad and ruin the person's entire subsequent life. Adrian, to the captain's surprise, only smiled relaxedly, convincing the man that everything would be fine and that he was absolutely confident in his plan. Turning to the side, Adrian said goodbye to the captain and headed straight for the trucks that would take him to the test site. And even though he thought Darren had left, he peered out from the shadows and gave the boy a dark look, thinking that his decision to go for an assessment right after waking up seemed incredibly arrogant to him. Turning his head, Adrian noticed the villain, and therefore thought that he should keep an eye on him because Darren would certainly not give up trying to kill his brother. There are indeed a large number of monsters outside the city, and although individually they fear the light of the Stargate, when gathering in huge hordes, the monsters cast aside their fear, rushing to attack a peaceful human settlement. And although the awakened ones go out against the monsters in large detachments, not a single sortie goes without losses. The soul of each person who fought for humanity against the monsters gains immortality under the light of the stars, and their tombstones emit a huge amount of stellar energy, distorting space and forming a special dimension known as the Lands of Gifts of Starlight. It is there that each newly awakened one takes part in the assessment of talent to continue the glory of the ancestors and to receive accompanying talent from the predecessors. While on his way to the territory where the talent assessment was being organized, Adrian used the magician's insight to easily read a fairly thick book that told about Adrian's upcoming test. He read that the undead were mostly found around the city, which meant that these were the monsters he needed to focus on when preparing. Adrian recalled that in his past life, without any support from his elders, he was able to obtain a gold-ranked accompanying talent only through his own labor. He read that the gold rank is received by 1 in 10,000 people, and the majority in turn receive the white lowest rank. A curious piece of information for Adrian was the fact that only 1 in millions could obtain the epic rank talent he was aiming for. Adrian had to look up from his book when the trucks finally reached their destination, and the boy was able to walk straight out into the hero's graveyard. Opening the book again, Adrian walked to his seat, trying not to be distracted by the whispers of the young men around him, surprised by his presence. Casting a sad glance at the pile of graves, Adrian was surprised that the boys studying at the academy treated the test so ignorantly. The guy's attention was suddenly drawn to a girl armed with a bow, about whom everyone around him immediately began to whisper. Hearing that her name was Rebecca and that she had awakened at only 11 years old, Adrian cast an appraising glance at her and was not at all surprised to see that her aura was no stronger than usual, although the concentration of the soul was quite dense. At this time, a group of 6 Starlight Gift Landgrave Guardians lined up in front of the crowd of awakened disciples. The stocky warrior and the long-haired archer stood out among them. The warrior called his comrade and whispered congratulations to him that his archer guild would soon be replenished with such a gifted warrior as Rebecca. And although the archer waved off these congratulations, his appearance literally screamed how happy he was. Seeing this, the warrior didn't miss the chance to joke about how disappointing it would be if she suddenly didn't get higher than iron rank. The comrades immediately began to argue, but the other guardians tried to calm them down and finally suggested starting the test. The guardian knight stepped forward to give a speech, calling on all present to pay their respects to their ancestors before the trial. All those who came to the test did not hesitate to kneel before the tombstones. When they stood up again, the knight continued his speech, telling them that these lands were indeed dangerous and that they must be careful not to die. Each of the guardians took turns speaking words of encouragement to the subjects. The largest tombstone suddenly lit up, and the streams of energy that burst out of it formed a portal to the earth, where the test was to take place. The guardians parted and opened a passage for the students to the portal, where all of them, including Adrian, moved. Adrian had a clear plan, and therefore he consulted the book to implement it as successfully as possible, although those around him clearly saw his reading as more stupidity than ingenuity. At one point, a fat guy blocked Adrian's path and directly called him an idiot, with a sly grin recommending that he go back to where the guy came from. Adrian didn't respond to the attacks, only throwing a contemptuous glance at the scoundrel, which caused even more aggression from the fat man. Finally taking a step to the side, Adrian walked around the boy, advising him to take better care of himself. At that same moment, the silhouette of the ancestor spirit shone above the fat man's head, causing him to turn around. It turned out that the guy accidentally stepped right into the territory of one of the spirit appraisers, starting his spirit test. A whole horde of spiders with malicious, ghostly faces suddenly appeared in front of the guy, the sight of which alone made the fat man scream in fear. The guy began to wave his arms chaotically, trying to protect himself from the scary monsters. However, a moment later, he was already lying on the floor, defeated. A white ring sparkled above his head, symbolizing that the arrogant boy had received a low-ranking talent. Adrian moved slowly along the testing grounds, passing each of the ancestral spirits, knowing that the most difficult and therefore valuable tests were in the very depths. The guy was not distracted by the students screaming with joy, whose strength of spirit allowed them to receive bronze and iron talents. All around him were the sounds of battles and tests of strength of spirit, where some achieved success and some tragically lost, thereby ruining their entire lives. Adrian, in turn, did not pay any attention to the events surrounding him, consulting the book and plotting his route to the most distant lands. On the way, he was called out by the same girl who had caused such a stir when she arrived for the test. She tried to warn Adrian that further along the way, the tests would be much more terrible and therefore more dangerous, for which Adrian thanked her and warned her that external forces would not help her pass the assessment. Not understanding what the guy was talking about, Rebecca looked back at the mechanical guards walking next to her, surprised that some student could so easily recognize that they were not real. And when she turned back to the guy, he had already left. Looking back at the book, Adrian began to think out loud, wondering why he hadn't yet met the silver-ranked warrior who should have been here according to the map. At the same moment, a beam of spiritual flame rushed towards Adrian, forcing the latter to dodge. In front of the boy stood the warrior spirit, looking puzzled, because he probably didn't expect to see here just a student who, judging by the first impression, hadn't even been to the academy. Noticing that the spirit was confused, Adrian released his own spiritual energy, which took the form of a mighty warrior several times taller than the appraiser's spirit, which greatly surprised the latter. Seeing this, the spirit instantly disappeared, not wanting to get involved with such power, causing Adrian to conclude that his soul energy would attract a lot of attention from the spirits of fallen heroes. And although around, in addition to the faint glow of the stars, there was a smoky darkness swirling, Adrian was perfectly oriented around, thanks to the book, which indicated in the form of coordinates how to get to the desired ancestor spirit. After checking it, the guy turned his head and, using the grave of the disappeared spirit as a landmark, moved to the right in search of more powerful spirits. As soon as he found himself near the star tombstones again, two spirits instantly incarnated and their spiritual light rushed towards Adrian. The boy dodged and turned to face the two puzzled spirits, who, seeing how bright his spirit's energy was, turned to face each other. To Adrian's surprise, the spirits began to fight with each other, from which the guy concluded that his soul was so attractive to them that they were ready to fight with each other for it. Smiling awkwardly, the guy ran away, throwing out a final apology for not being able to choose them for his test. Adrian went deeper and deeper, meeting more and more spirits who wanted to test the boy and grant him their talent. Passing by the mighty warrior, Adrian met the spirit of a dexterous and nimble girl who tried to stay in his field of vision as long as possible. But he rejected her too. Seeing the golden spirit of the curvy sorceress, Adrian even became embarrassed and for a long second could not take his eyes off her attractive forms. But turning away, he moved towards the designated goal. For many hours, the boy traveled through the talent evaluation lands in search of epic rank spirits, but he never came across any, although the fact was that even the golden spirits paid attention to him. Passing by one of the trees, Adrian heard the noise of a battle and, deciding to take a break from the monotonous search for a while, went towards the sound to see what was making them. Coming out into an open clearing in the middle of the forest, the boy saw the golden light of the test, where his friend Rebecca was fighting, trying to find her talent. And although Adrian warned her, the picture that opened up to him made it clear to him that the girl did not listen to the warnings, because even she did not understand why the spirit of her ancestor was attacking her so fiercely. In anger, the golden archer attacked the girl with a hail of arrows, not wanting to give her his talent. As the golden arrows landed in the ground, they were engulfed in turquoise flames from tip to fletching until they were completely transformed. The arrows turned into monsters, which immediately rushed at the girl, covered by doll guards. The girl decided that the ancestor was seriously going to kill his descendant, although she really could not understand how she had angered the golden spirit. Expecting to have to fight only with spirit, Rebecca was taken aback when she saw monsters strong enough for a simple student to cope with. Not wanting to give up, the girl used well-aimed shots to destroy every monster that rushed forward to bite her. Even if she was unable to defend herself from blows from behind, the doll guards bravely covered her, throwing themselves under the jaws of the creatures, just so that their mistress would remain unharmed. Looking up from the corpse of one of the monsters, the girl saw the furious grin of her ancestor, who was already aiming a new arrow in her direction and shouting that Rebecca was not worthy. Another arrow flew towards the girl with incredible speed, ready to pierce her body, but Rebecca did not intend to, and therefore jumped out of the trajectory of the shot. In turn, the arrow, right in flight, turned into another monster, whose jaws were ready to immediately bite through her throat. With a shot that was accurate and so fast that it was difficult to notice with the eye, the girl dealt with the creature and, exhaling heavily, began to talk about how her grandfather always called her the most talented in their family. Looking up in despair, she saw that one of her mechanical guards had been almost completely destroyed. Tears began to well up in her eyes from not understanding why her ancestor considered her unworthy and wanted to finish off his descendant. The spirit, however, paid no attention to the girl's tears and aimed a new arrow at her, screaming in a voice full of rage that she was unworthy of his power. Standing proudly before her ancestor, the girl looked boldly into the spirit's eyes, burning with anger, and cried out, asking what she had done to deserve his wrath. Peeking out from behind the tree, Adrian calmly asked the girl if she really didn't understand what exactly she had done wrong. Distracted from his original goal, the golden spirit looked at Adrian and was immediately dumbfounded by how strong the aura was in this guy. Seeing her ancestor's surprise, the girl instantly felt angry and again threw a defiant glance at him, screaming about how hard she had honed her skills and strengthened her soul. Using all her willpower, Rebecca looked firmly at the spirit, never ceasing to be convinced that she would never be left without the talent inherent in every member of her family. Pulling back the string of her bow, the girl cried out that she would release her arrow even if she had to die. At that moment, her body was engulfed in a harmless golden flame, inherent in the spirit she was fighting, causing Rebecca to realize that she had been able to resonate with her ancestor. Adrian smiled and noted that the talent assessment test is primarily about will, courage, and fortitude, and not physical strength. The guy said that it was the mechanical guards that protected the girl during the fight that became an indicator of her fear before the fight, which is why the ancestor shouted about her unworthiness. The golden light of the trial finally faded, and Rebecca knew that the trial was over in complete victory. She sighed heavily, noticing how tense every muscle in her body was after the hilarious fight. The golden archer extended his hand forward and the flame from it touched the girl's body, healing her and giving her what she came for. Proud and pleased with herself, Rebecca passed the test and therefore received into her possession the sign of golden talent that came with her family. Watching from the side, Adrian smiled, seeing how the girl received what would make her life incredibly prestigious. As the spirit melted into thin air, Rebecca turned to him and awkwardly thanked him for the advice he had given her. And although the girl asked how he himself, being only a student, awakened only recently, ended up so far away in the lands where the golden talents are, Adrian only answered that his goal was the best possible talent, and, turning away, moved away. Noting that his soul seemed weak, the girl heard the guy brazenly say that it was none of her business and asked to keep his presence here a secret. Seeing that the guy had gone further away from the lands of the gold ranks, the girl was quite taken aback, realizing that his goal was even higher. Eventually, Adrian reached his goal in the form of a huge tombstone bound by a monstrous golden chain. Smiling contentedly, the guy noted that he was on the right track, since he saw something so colossal in front of him. The moment Adrian took another step, his body tensed up from the terrifying force of pressure, indicating how difficult a test awaited the boy, since even being here was difficult for him. The huge, monstrous dog looked to be of an advanced rank, and therefore, according to Adrian's feeling, was an incredible number of times stronger than the guy himself. However, the guy was not at all scared, but on the contrary, he was happy, realizing that it was here that the concentration of spiritual energy was so great that he could absorb as much of it as he wanted, gaining strength. Sitting in the lotus position, the boy began to free his spirit to interact with the infinite and powerful energy surrounding him. He folded his hands and concentrated all his power into them, causing the energy that had permeated the air to begin to materialize and form into a sphere in smooth threads. At the same time, a bright blue rune circle appeared out of nowhere behind Adrian, which helped the guy absorb the flows surrounding him. Eventually, he stood up and straightened up, and the energy flows dissipated, because Adrian had already absorbed the maximum amount for the status of a student. As a result of these manipulations, the guy could feel that his strength had increased 6 times, which meant that he could safely withstand the pressure of the place surrounding him. Looking up, he boldly looked at the monstrous dog protecting the tombstone. As soon as he stepped closer, Adrian came into the Hellhound's field of vision, causing it, which had been lying peacefully until then, to rise to all fours and growl menacingly. A huge beast, whose jaws could tear apart an entire crowd with one bite, stood before Adrian, ready to destroy anyone who dared to appear for the epic rank test. However, Adrian, who was once a god warrior, was not at all frightened by the terrifying sight and boldly stepped forward. In an instant, the monster pushed off with all 4 paws and rushed at the guy, intending to tear him to pieces, but Adrian himself was not going to die so easily. The rune circle that appeared behind him served as a much-needed boost for Adrian, and he, using such a useful skill, rushed into battle. His speed was so incredible that the Hellhound, grinning angrily at his opponent, could not keep up with the warrior who flashed like lightning. Dodging another blow, Adrian grinned maliciously, calling the hound just a puppy, incapable of putting up a decent fight. At that very moment, the dog let out a monstrous roar, so loud that Adrian had to crouch down to protect himself from it. In a mindless rage, the dog rushed straight at the guy again, ready to finish him off for his insolence. And although his jaws were almost closed on Adrian's body, he only grinned maliciously and did not move from his place. And as soon as they closed, Adrian penetrated the upper jaw of the dog's mouth, as if passing through a dense wall of fog that did not cause any harm. Adrian stood over the hound's jaw, noting with satisfaction that a real hound was undead and would not react to provocation in any way, unlike this dog who had fallen into a rage. With one flick of his finger, the confident Adrian destroyed the dog's form, shattering it into hundreds of pieces. Having landed, the guy proudly straightened his clothes and looked at the stairs that the mighty beast was so jealously protecting. A view of the incredibly majestic-looking gates through which he had to pass opened up before Adrian. As soon as he came closer, the gates swung open with a loud hum before the brave warrior who had come to show what he was capable of. And although there was confidence in his eyes, Adrian was a little excited about what was happening now and what was supposed to happen any minute. Looking straight ahead, the boy took a deep breath and stepped forward proudly, like a worthy warrior who had earned the right to gain strength. Although these gates were called hellish, beyond them, Hadrian saw a rather calming landscape in the form of a waterfall and a lake surrounded by rocks and ancient trees. But the guy had no time to admire the beauty, because the moment he stepped closer, a pillar of scorching flame headed towards him with incredible speed, forcing him to dodge. Turning in the direction from which the flames burst out, Adrian only managed to notice how the blade burning with fire was approaching his face. Having only just noticed the blade, Adrian didn't even close his eyes when it stopped a centimeter away from the face of the one who dared to come for the epic talent. The heroic spirit of epic rank hovered in the air in front of the guy, raising his blade and looking at the newcomer with surprise, who turned out to be just a student. Looking bravely straight into the warrior's eyes, Adrian asked him not to hold back, arguing that he had gotten here not by luck, but out of a desire to see what an epic rank was capable of. The stunned warrior spirit looked at the disciple with a shocked look. not understanding how a mere disciple could dare to travel so far just to see what an epic rank could do. Smiling slyly, Adrian found his words and asked the warrior to finally conduct the test, because he was going to show the spirit all the power he possessed. The warrior softened, sighed, and corrected the boy, noting that the fact that he had reached this place did not mean that he would be able to defeat a representative of the epic rank. But smiling, he agreed to show his power. At the same moment, with one snap of the warrior's fingers, the guy found himself in the arena, looking around in surprise. After analyzing the situation, he realized that his spiritual energy had increased fourfold, overcoming the limitations imposed by the status of a disciple. It turned out that the warrior had transferred not the body, but Adrian's mind and his own straight into the arena, and their bodies remained where they stood. At this time, Adrian and the warrior's spirit bodies were being watched by 5 more spirits, whose energy was shining with a bright light of epic rank. They were clearly pleased to see someone come to their lands for an epic rank talent for the first time in a long time, although they were surprised that the person who came was not an outstanding student at all. One of the spirits was clearly angry that the warrior spirit got to Adrian first, because after defeating the Hellhound, he himself was going to test the student. At this time, Adrian, already armed with a sword, was warming up, wondering out loud that the epic rank was so strong that with just one wish, it transferred the guy straight into the world of dreams. The warrior standing in front of Adrian swung his blade and threw it to the side so that it got stuck in the stone. He spread his arms and invited Adrian to attack, ready to fight on equal terms, since the spirit himself compared his strength to the guy's. Adrian smirked and noted that his opponent was acting a bit arrogant, thinking that he could defeat a guy without a sword on equal terms. A moment later, the boy rushed into battle, using all his fighting skills and past life experience to leave his opponent no chance. And although the spirit fought desperately, he understood that even with a sword in his hands, it would be incredibly difficult for him to defend himself, let alone resist unarmed. The man tried his best, but Adrian was incredibly fast and attacked as hard as he could. In the end, the spirit warrior was unable to dodge the final attack, and the boy put the blade to his neck. The warrior was genuinely amazed at how strong this disciple was, having so boldly stood before an epic rank spirit despite having awakened only recently. Smiling kindly at the stricken spirit, the guy suggested that he give it his all and show what the epic rank is really capable of. Focusing on the upcoming fair fight, the man extended his hand and pulled his blade into it, which burst out of the stone. Smiling at the upcoming battle, both warriors rushed at each other, wanting to cross swords and find out which of the two was stronger. The swords of both warriors clashed, striking sparks in a stunning dance of combat. And although the spirit warrior fought desperately, one mistake was enough for the former god warrior to make one precise strike with his blade. And this one blow was enough to knock out the blade and hands of the stunned enemy. The spirit warrior was absolutely at a loss, as he sincerely could not understand how he could be defeated by just a student. You could see the confusion in his eyes as he looked at his hands, as if doubting his own abilities. Pleased with himself, Adrian thought that now the result of his test was quite satisfactory to finally receive the epic rank talent he deserved. And although he was ready to receive his reward, the spirit warrior suddenly melted into thin air, causing confusion in Adrian. Returning to his body, the warrior looked at his opponent with curiosity, whose mind was still in the dream world. The other epic spirits, seeing their comrade return to his body, were surprised, deciding that the test ended so quickly, and besides, there was no ritual of transferring talent, and they concluded that the guy lost. However, they were puzzled when they saw that Adrian himself had not yet returned from the dream world, and so they asked their comrade what had happened to them there. Raising his head proudly and not looking away, the warrior honestly admitted that he had lost the fight. The other spirits were shocked to hear that their comrade, whose strength reached epic levels, lost to an ordinary student, even though they were equal in the dream world. They assumed that the warrior had simply given in, but he shook his head and replied that the fight had been fair and that he had been rightly defeated, and for that reason he had an idea. After listening to their comrade, the epic spirits were divided in their opinions, trying to decide whether to follow his plan or not. However, after some discussion, they decided to agree, and at the same moment all 6 of them were transported into the world of dreams and appeared before Adrian's eyes. Adrian, who had already thought that his rival had abandoned him in this world, relaxed when he discovered that he had returned with reinforcements in the form of 5 spirits of epic heroes. As soon as they appeared in this world, each of the 6 spirits first looked with an appraising glance at the one they were about to test. Smiling kindly, the spirit mage noticed that the guy didn't even blink an eye when he saw 6 epic spirits in front of him. Scratching his beard, the old man opened his eyes and spoke with the hoarseness in his voice characteristic of his appearance. With one hand behind his back and a proud nod towards his comrades, the mage offered Adrian to fight all 6 epic spirits at once. Looking at those who had arrived with confusion, Adrian heard that if he won, he would receive 1 epic talent from each of them, which made his eyes sparkle with realization of the situation. Behind the backs of the spirits of men stood the archer and the summoner, who, having looked at the guy sarcastically, suggested that he leave with the talent of the warrior, because judging by his appearance, he would not have enough strength. In response, the former god warrior laughed like a madman, taking genuine pleasure in the entire situation. Proudly raising his gaze and raising his sword, the boy expressed his desire to accept the challenge and his unwavering readiness to fight. The mage frowned, calling the guy self-confident, and the knight called him arrogant, although it seemed he only liked it more. Taking a stance, Adrian kept his eyes on his opponents, ready for any attack from them. The spirits had already pulled out their weapons and were also preparing for battle, warning the guy that the following events could be damn dangerous for him. The moment the mage finished speaking, the spirit thief disappeared from sight, launching an attack that was astounding in its speed. In a second, the thief was right behind Adrian, ready to deliver a fatal wound to his back with his blade. However, he did not expect that. Using the reflexes of an archer, he instantly turned around and swung his sword towards his opponent. One powerful blow to the defending enemy was enough to send the thief spirit flying. And although he defended himself, the force of the blow was so great that, having crashed into the wall, the spirit immediately lost consciousness, leaving the battle. Realizing that they couldn't win alone, the epic heroes rushed into battle together in order to wipe the smug smile off their opponent's face. The mage's fireballs were clearly of extraordinary power, but using the thief's speed and the archer's reaction, the boy easily dodged each of them. Thanks to the mage's insight, he was able to calculate every swing of the blade to protect himself from the archer's shots. The spirit mage attempted to use a paralyzing discharge to stop the boy and allow his fellow knight to strike, but Adrian somehow ignored the spell's effect, rushing straight towards the old man. Finding himself close to the spirit mage, the boy swung to strike, noting with pleasure that the knight's physique and willpower were excellent protection against magic. Once again, with one blow, Adrian was able to knock out the mage, ensuring that magic would no longer hinder him from fighting. Turning around, the boy used all his reaction time to block the arrows of the spirit archer flying at him and direct them all back at the attacker. And although the girl dodged the arrows, Adrian, who had instantly approached her, swung his blade, knocking out the archer, leaving only 3 rivals in front of him. Cursing, the spirit knight complained to the spirit summoner that he could not keep track of her, and she, in turn, asked him to delay the enemy so that she could call on the huge bear for help. A simple ritual was enough for her to have a huge monstrous bear rise to its full mighty height in the arena. The spirit knight did not fail and, raising his morning star, used his ability to immobilize Adrian. At that very moment, the bear rushed to attack the guy, wanting to tear him apart with its claws. Although the bear was a beast created by the summoner's spirit, Adrian's summoning abilities were stronger, and he took control of the bear, forcing it to attack the knight, knocking him out of the fight with one blow. Adrian, who was instantly next to the girl, smiled slyly at the girl before striking. Like the others, Adrian dealt with the girl with one blow, knocking her out. Turning to the last epic rank spirit, Adrian asked if he would fight, but the warrior smiled, replying that he had already lost before, so there was no point in fighting. Turning around, Adrian saw that all the epic rank spirits had already stood up and were cheering for his victory. After congratulating him, they returned to the real world and stood in a circle over the boy's body, intending to perform a ritual after which Adrian would receive his talent. As they promised, the spirits gave him not 1 talent, but 1 talent from each, although no one knew whether they could exist in one body. The energy released by each of the spirits flowed into Adrian's body and began to mix with the other 5. The aura emanating from the mixing of talents was so bright that even the mighty epic spirits were amazed by the strength of its light. The stricken spirit mage whispered reverently that the resulting rank would be much higher than epic. Concentrating the energy of the spirits inside himself, Adrian strained himself greatly, trying to hold it inside himself and realizing that the last stage of fusion was much more difficult. Releasing all the power of his fighting spirit, Adrian used it to cope with such a difficult task. The boy's spirit was eventually able to contain all this powerful energy that permeated the body, and it transformed into a crystal heart in the boy's hands. Upon receiving this new power, Adrian assessed it sensibly, thinking about the well-known scale of talent levels. Knowing that it was incredibly difficult to obtain the gold rank and almost impossible to obtain the epic rank, no one could have imagined that there could be a talent level higher than the epic rank. The heart transformed back into streams of energy of incredible power, which were instantly absorbed into Adrian's body, who immediately realized that his new talent was mythical. An understanding of a new talent arose in the boy's mind, and in particular, why the spirit energy had taken the shape of a heart. Because this new talent was called the Heart of the Brave and could increase the hero's power by 10 times. Opening his eyes, Adrian saw that the epic spirits were enveloped in a warm light, and their faces expressed satisfaction and pride, because they not only saw a talent whose power is higher than the epic, but also endowed it themselves to a worthy warrior. Smiling at the heroes disappearing into the light, Adrian relaxed peacefully, proud that he was able to not only fulfill his goal, but achieve something even better. Turning towards the exit from the lands of epic rank, the guy lingered for the last time to leave an offering to the disappeared spirits, in the form of the book that helped him get here, as well as a bottle of delicious sake that he had prepared in advance, promising them that he would definitely protect the City of Dawn from any misfortunes. At this time, a proud Rebecca returned from the lands of trials, illuminated by the symbol and light of the gold rank, which greatly pleased the guardian archer, who immediately called her a true genius. Turning her head away, the girl embarrassedly babbled that she received her talent only thanks to the help of her dear mentor, and that she was not a genius at all. The proud guardian archer disagreed with her, saying that the gold rank only appeared once every 10 years, while looking sarcastically at the guardian warrior, none of whose students had received a rank higher than silver. Outraged by this gesture, the guardian warrior was outraged that the students of the guardian archer could only rely on luck, while not deserving the high talents that they received. And although the guardian warrior claimed that among the warriors there would be such a strong awakened one that he could receive the gold rank, he was met only with a sarcastic grin from his comrade. Distracted from the squabble between the two guardians, Rebecca looked around, trying to spot Adrian, and finally find out what rank the one who so calmly passed by the gold-ranked lands received. Realizing that the guy was not around, the girl looked at the portal, anxiously waiting for him to come out of it. When the guardian archer decided to announce the end of the test, Rebecca asked him to stop and wait, because one test subject had not yet left the testing grounds. At the same moment, Adrian, stretching his neck, climbed out of the portal, meeting there not a stormy ovation, but only the already familiar disdain, because the guardian archer was sure that the guy had failed his test. Rebecca, blushing at the sight of the guy, did not hear the mentor's sarcastic comments, remembering only, not without a shadow of embarrassment, that the name of her new acquaintance was Adrian. Glancing to the side, the guy immediately saw the fat man who had crossed his path at the very beginning of the test, and who was now mocking Adrian, thinking that he was hiding from the test, afraid of failing it. Ignoring the snide comments, the guardian warrior took a step towards the boy and asked with a smile what rank one of his warrior charges had received. Adrian smiled and relaxed for a second, causing the aura of his talent to glow faintly, covering the entire body of the awakened one. And although the hero received a mythical rank, everyone around saw what he wanted to show them, namely the aura and symbol of the gold rank shining on the guy's body. Everyone around seemed to have gone wild, discussing and marveling at the fact that this time 2 participants had received the gold rank, although even one was an incredible rarity. Smiling contentedly, Adrian noted, not without pleasure, that he was incredibly lucky that his new talent allowed him to flaunt the rank that the hero himself wanted. The guy, with his hands on his hips, without even deigning to look at the arrogant scoundrels who were mocking him, told them out loud that they should not mock others, but try to become stronger themselves, which greatly embarrassed the stunned fat man. And only Rebecca, whose embarrassed look Adrian caught, could not understand why the guy received only a gold rank, because he went much further than the place where the golden spirits were. As if reading the girl's thoughts, Adrian put his index finger to his lips, reminding her that he had asked her to keep quiet about where he was heading in the lands of trials. Once again embarrassed by the attention of her new acquaintance, Rebecca thought only about how many secrets Adrian had from everyone around him. And while she was reasoning, the guardian warrior rushed towards Adrian, whose smile made it clear that he was incredibly happy that one of his charges had finally managed to obtain a gold rank. Although Adrian, not having received pleasure from someone else's touch, asked him to leave him alone, calling him a bearded man. Offended by the unexpected insult, the guardian took one step away from Adrian, removing his hand from his shoulder. However, a moment later he cast aside his resentment, deciding that his students receiving a gold rank was much more important than any insults. And so he again put his hand on his shoulder and smiled happily, saying how proud he was of his student. However, the other warrior teachers, looking at the man with condemnation, noted with displeasure that they were seeing Adrian for the first time, and therefore did not consider his victory in the test to be their merit. However, even the guardian archer, who had been mocking his comrade just a second ago, now stood with a serious look, noting that receiving 2 gold talents was a truly historical event. The news that 2 participants had achieved gold rank spread like wildfire throughout the streets of Dawn City, so quickly that almost on the same day, Darren, who wanted to finish off Adrian more and more with every second, learned about this truly frightening event for him. He instantly became furious as soon as he found out that Adrian had received a gold rank, because the guy did everything to prevent this from happening. Adrian himself did not want to waste time after the test, and realizing that he could not do without the academy, immediately went there after the test. His mere appearance at the academy was news number 1 for everyone there, as gold rank among warriors is an incredibly rare thing. Standing near the counter with the guardian warrior, whose name turned out to be Frank, Adrian heard with slight displeasure all these comments addressed to him, which from sarcastic and arrogant became interested and flirtatious. Frowning, Adrian even began to regret showing people his gold rank, because he was getting much more extra attention than he wanted. Finally, the man standing behind the counter, smiling welcomingly, handed Adrian an envelope, a badge with a warrior symbol and a card indicating his status. Still proud of his protégé, Frank put his hands on his hips and congratulated Adrian wholeheartedly on his official entry into the Warriors Guild. Adrian was about to unpack the envelope, but Frank, who had stepped aside, waved his hand at him and called him to follow, because he was going to help the guy get a well-deserved reward for his efforts. For the first time since the test, Adrian smiled at Frank and followed him, noting to himself that he was surprised that the guild treated its members well enough. After walking through the long corridors of the academy, the men arrived at a training room filled with mannequins and exercise machines, in the middle of which stood a stocky man whose hair, with its bright green color, resembled a fresh apple. After greeting Adrian and Frank, the man introduced himself as Roosevelt Walter and added that he was the treasurer of the Warriors Guild, and therefore it was he who would offer Adrian a reward corresponding to the gold rank. Looking into the box that Roosevelt, bowing his head, handed to the guy, Adrian saw a book there, the inscription on the cover of which read the name of the special skill of the warrior class. Taking the box from Adrian's hands, Frank himself looked inside and smiled, looking up at Roosevelt and noting that the treasurer was very generous, because this skill was really powerful, to which Roosevelt said with some pleasure that they were obliged to put all their efforts into developing a gold rank hero. In addition to the skill, Adrian also received a total of 10 initial rank starstones, which is a significant reward, since Frank himself only received 1 at the time. Opening the book, Adrian read a couple of lines, but almost immediately became perplexed by their content. Roosevelt smiled again when he saw the boy's reaction and said that learning skills was an incredibly important activity for every awakened one, and therefore Adrian was advised to start training as soon as possible. Smiling happily, the boy agreed with the treasurer, promising to start training as soon as possible, and thought to himself that things were going very, very interestingly. As soon as Adrian and Frank left, Roosevelt wiped the smile from his face and headed to his office, where Darren was already waiting for him, immediately beginning to ask the treasurer whether he had completed his task. Calmly closing the door behind him, Roosevelt looked at Darren with a slightly displeased expression, and just as calmly noted that he could handle any task much better than Darren. It turned out that Roosevelt had specially altered Adrian's skill book, and because of it, the guy could soon become insane. Enjoying the thought of how sinisterly brilliant his plan was, Roosevelt finished his thought by telling Darren that he should send a request for a duel as soon as Adrian went crazy, thanks to which the guy would be able to get rid of his competitor without any unnecessary problems. Exhaling with relief, Darren smiled at Roosevelt, noting with some pleasure that he always completed his tasks 100%, and therefore, as a thank you for his work, he would definitely thank his comrade when Adrian died. Roosevelt looked away and said that he was only following orders from above and therefore did not expect a reward, but would certainly be glad to receive one. He chose to turn away when Darren, with a wild look and a cruel smile on his face, promised that he would kill his sworn brother no matter what it took. And although the plan was indeed good and would have worked on someone else, Adrian's actual mythical rank was a good indication to him that the skill had actually been reworked, which would spell big trouble for him. Adrian thought hard, comparing all the facts with each other and seriously suspecting that this trouble with the skill was directly related to Darren. Having instantly figured out Roosevelt's plan, Adrian put the book down and decided that he would be happy to play along with him, pretending that he really had fallen under the influence of such a mild illness that the book was supposed to create for him. Adrian sarcastically imagined how Roosevelt would look when he saw that his plan hadn't worked, especially if Frank was nearby, and the guy would be helped in this matter by those 10-star stones that he received for his gold rank. Opening the box, Adrian remembered that the star stones were actually the energy of real star stones concentrated into a crystal form, using which awakened ones could very quickly increase their power and become stronger. Realizing that thanks to his experience as a god warrior, the guy is well versed in all the skills even at the divine level, but if he wants to gain power, he needs to start all over again. Sitting in the lotus position in the room allocated to him personally, Adrian closed his eyes and used his spirit to begin absorbing energy, while simultaneously thinking about how the skill of the unpredictable fist blade is a rare skill, and it is absolutely necessary to learn it. Using his experience, the guy read all the necessary techniques for developing this skill and found out which nuances of this technique were spoiled and corrected them without any problems. In intense meditation, the boy concentrated on studying, hoping only that 10-star stones would be enough to help him master the skill. As soon as Adrian concentrated and closed his eyes, his spirit burst out of his body and caught the stone in a weak whirlwind of blue flame. And as soon as he started, his hand was burned with pain, which almost took the guy out of concentration. The flame enveloped the fist, changing color and forming a blade, but Adrian felt it as if someone was scraping his bones. The guy tried his best to restrain himself and not unclench his fist so that the skill would be finally fixed. But alas, he couldn't resist and his palm unclenched, and the flame began to gradually go out. Even though the guy had gained the power of all 6 skills, and his talent was stronger than even the epic one, he realized that he had underestimated such a powerful skill, and therefore would not be able to master it in one try, because during that one try, the skin of his hand turned red and shriveled from the fire. Knowing that it would take at least a year for a normal person, Adrian smirked, knowing that with his strength, he would not allow himself to hesitate, and would definitely master the skill as soon as possible. Concentrating again, Adrian used the power of his spirit to once again cause his hand to become covered in bright pink flames, which now took on a much more distinct blade shape. Exhaling with satisfaction from his own work, the guy stood up and with one movement made the sword fly from the wall straight into his own hand. Forcing his energy to form a blade shape around his hand again, the boy swung his sword at the wall with such force that a rather wide crack appeared in it. Looking at this crack and easily moving the blade, the guy noted with some pleasure that the skill was really very strong, and therefore the time and stones spent on learning it were clearly worth it. Relaxing his hand, the boy recalled the energy and remembered that even when he moved to the next rank, his skill level would increase in the same way. As soon as he left the training hall, Darren appeared in full height before his eyes, his predatory gaze saying more clearly than any words that he would not leave without bloodshed today. Looking slyly at his brother, Darren took out a special document and without much fear walked towards Adrian, challenging him to a duel to find out who would become the heir of the Guardian family. Pulling out the duel document in front of Adrian, Darren loudly asked Adrian if he would accept the challenge, causing everyone around to turn their attention to the boys. With his hands proudly on his hips, Adrian looked at Darren with interest, clearly pleased that he had predicted all the upcoming events and noting how much attention they had attracted. With a smile, The guy noted that now he himself had become awakened, which meant that all his inheritance went to him and only him. Not expecting such words, Darren looked around warily, hearing how everyone around him began to discuss him with condemnation for trying to take Adrian's rightful inheritance. Hearing someone calling for him to be expelled from the academy, Darren panicked and held up the paper in front of him, indicating that this duel was coordinated with the awakened community. The warriors around looked at the paper in bewilderment, not understanding how the community could have allowed such a conflict to happen. Realizing that no one would touch him now, Darren believed in himself and turned to Adrian again, pointing out that refusal would mean that he renounced any claims to the Guardian family inheritance. And although Adrian himself felt anger, he understood that this anger was caused by the memories of the guy in whose body he was reborn, and Darren was not worth even a drop of his hatred. Smiling slyly, Darren asked if Adrian would agree to a duel to the death, clearly remembering that Adrian himself must be in a state of insanity right now. Something suddenly flashed in front of the guy, and when he reacted, Adrian was already standing a few steps away from him, relaxedly reading the paper that his brother had just been holding in his hands. Amazed by such incredible speed, Darren looked in amazement at his hand, in which he had literally just been holding the paper that Adrian now had. Looking with disdain at the bewildered boy, Adrian held out the paper forward and responded to the duel request with a firm voice, agreeing. Looking up at his brother again, Darren stared at Adrian in shock, still trying to figure out how he had snatched the document from his hand so quickly. However, Darren was not afraid, glad that they had ruined the skill of the unpredictable fist blade, which meant that Adrian was about to lose control of himself. Darren stood in a stance, prepared for an attack, and was 100% sure that today he would finally finish off his brother, who had become so annoying to him. And although his opponent stood ready to fight, Adrian was relaxed and calm, realizing that Darren would not be able to win under any circumstances. In an instant, dark green energy swirled around Darren and his blade glowed bright green. And in another moment, he suddenly disappeared in the place where he stood and suddenly appeared to the left of Adrian with the blade already prepared for the fatal blow. At that very moment, his energy took the form of a snake, and the blade rushed towards Adrian's throat, ready to cut it and end the life of the unlucky victim. With a slight movement of his hand, the hero intercepted his opponent's attack and deflected it to the side, smiling as he noted that Darren was repeating his techniques. Panicked by such a difficult situation, Darren simply could not believe that his opponent was so clever that he read all his skills enough to intercept his attack. Seizing the moment when Darren was defenseless, Adrian used his new blade fist skill. With one blow, which had become so familiar to him, the guy sent his opponent flying. Darren fell on his back, hitting himself hard, but using his thief's reflexes, he quickly turned over and stood on both feet, grinning angrily at Adrian. There was a look of confusion in his eyes, as he expected that Adriana would go crazy from her new skill. Smiling relaxedly, Adrian received compliments and words of encouragement from the other warriors, shouting at him to show the thieves what they were capable of. However, another thief standing nearby noted that Darren was trash and asked not to compare the thieves' guild to him. Frank stood nearby, watching the battle with satisfaction and noting every movement, saying out loud that he was very proud of his new gold rank in the Warriors Guild, because Adrian had learned such a difficult skill so quickly. Darting forward, Adrian used his blade fist skill again, preparing to hit Darren even harder. His blow again fell on the body of his opponent, who, even blocking the attack, flew to the side from such a powerful force. Clearly enjoying beating the scoundrel, Adrian noted that his opponent was quite tenacious and could stand on his own 2 feet even after such strong blows. Straightening up, the guy pulled back the collar of his cape with the hand that hurt the least, revealing a golden protective vest that helped him withstand blows, naturally not leaving the enemy without a sarcastic comment about his weakness. However, opinions of those around Darren about the fact that he wore protection were divided, as some decided that it was dishonest, while others noted that the rules do not prohibit protection. The desperate obsession with the outcome was visible in Darren's eyes as he shouted that he would finally make Adrian die. He rushed forward again, preparing his blade for another attack. His energy now took the form of 2 snakes, ready to bite the enemy's throat, and Darren himself, using his skills to the fullest, approached the enemy. This time, without even a hint of a smile, Adrian called Darren a narrow-minded idiot, facing the oncoming attack without fear. Once again, with a single light movement, Adrian used the blade fist to block such a powerful attack without any effort. Darren's eyes showed fear, as he clearly didn't expect his opponent to block his strongest skill so easily. Looking at the enemy with disdain, the boy noted with pleasure that he was only playing along with Darren, who thought that his armor would provide him with good protection. With these words, Adrian used the blade fist on his other hand, which he directed straight towards the enemy's face. Darren, who had failed to block the attack, was forced to feel the full power of such a strong skill. In turn, Adrian, realizing that the enemy had lost the ability to defend himself, unleashed several blows of the fist blade on him at once. In the end, with another powerful blow, the guy sent Darren flying again. The guy tried to group himself, but this time he simply didn't have enough strength to stand up, and so he fell heavily to the floor. Looking up, the beaten Darren looked at his opponent in bewilderment, not understanding why nothing was happening to him. Casting a contemptuous glance at his opponent, Adrian said that he knew all about his vile plan to drive him crazy, which shocked Darren. Knowing that their duel was to be to the death, Adrian crouched over the weakened Darren and said that he would spare him, but only on one condition. Lost in excitement and panic, Darren heard his opponent demanding to tell the whole truth about who is behind all the intrigues against the Guardian family, as well as what happened to Adrian's parents. Having lost all hope, Darren clenched his jaws hard, causing a sound like something bursting. Adrian took a step back, stunned to realize that there was poison in the guy's mouth, and he chose to die rather than answer the guy's questions. With one last sardonic glance at Adrian, Darren told him that he would never know what happened to his parents, and that he was no match for those who were determined to end the life of the Guardian clan. A stunned Adrian listened in silence as Darren spoke his last words, laced with malice and contempt. After saying his last word, Darren suddenly rolled his eyes and leaned back, his chest no longer rising and falling in time with his breathing, making it clear that Adrian's adopted brother was now dead. Adrian felt incredible contempt for his opponent, but also a certain amount of respect, because he was ready to die for his goals. Regretfully turning away from the deceased, the guy thought that those who were behind all this apparently had great power in this city. And although he knew that Darren's death would bring even more trouble upon him, he was filled with excitement and a desire to find out how strong his enemies were. Realizing that he still only held a weak F rank in the guild, Adrian headed towards the exit of the hall, deciding to quickly return to training, but not noticing how someone was hiding around the corner, who was watching the progress of the battle with great curiosity. Sometime later, Adrian was in an apartment on the outskirts, training with starstones. Sitting in the lotus position and holding the starstone between his palms, the boy reconnected with his spirit for the best possible learning. Eventually, another stone crumbled to dust, having exhausted all its stellar energy. Upset over losing his last star stone, Adrian thought out loud, coming to the realization that his body was indeed incredibly strong, having absorbed all the energy from the 10 starstones he had received from the talent test in just a couple of days. Clenching and unclenching his fist, the guy noted with pleasure that in just a couple of days he had increased his energy level from 105 to 246 units, which was a truly outstanding result. Looking at the dust left from the used starstone, Adrian estimated that one such stone contained energy equivalent to about 10 units of spiritual value. However, in reality, this was only a theory and an extremely erroneous one, since the average awakened one can only absorb a smaller part of the energy stored in the stone. For such an awakened one, a result of 10% of the total volume of energy of the stone is quite good. If a gifted person can use 30% or more of energy, then he can safely be considered gifted. However, without expecting it, Adrian managed to absorb a full 70% of the stone's energy, which was a truly impressive result. Absolutely pleased with himself, the guy remembered that in his past life he had achieved only 40% of the result, which meant that his current body was indeed several times more powerful. Having warmed up after the long process of absorption, Adrian regretfully noted that on the outskirts of the city, he received much less energy from the stars than he could have if he were right at the gates. His gaze turned aggressive as he remembered how he had tried to reclaim the Guardian family estate, which was rightfully his. Immediately after the battle, Adrian went to the residence of the awakened community to gain access to his estate. But as it turned out, after passing into Darren's possession, the estate no longer belonged to the Guardian family. Smiling cheekily and interlacing his fingers in a businesslike manner, The man noted that after Darren's death, the estate passed into the possession of the awakened society, and Adrian was only entitled to a small apartment on the outskirts. Adrian had to admit that it would be very difficult to get his property back, since apparently this estate was of great value to the one who was plotting against the guy. Hanging his head sadly, Adrian also admitted that, alas, he could not resist anyone significant, since his rank in the guild was only the initial one. And another sad thought visited the guy's mind when he realized that he had miscalculated again. He learned that although he had no right to the estate, he would still receive an inheritance, although it turned out to be much less than what the guy had expected, and it would only be enough for 20 stones of stellar energy. Pressing his fingers to his head, Adrian winced at the pain in his head, noting that he never thought he would one day be stressed so much over money problems. After searching through his pockets thoroughly, the guy pulled out the warrior token that had been given to him at the guild. With one flick of his finger across the surface of the token, Adrian caused a reaction that resulted in a holographic light projecting an image directly into the air. Without a shadow of a smile, the guy looked at the numbers indicating his level and amount of energy, and noted with dismay that he needed a lot more starstones. With a slight movement of his finger on the token, the guy changed the picture and saw several tasks in front of him that the guild had provided him with, and he gloomily noted that the rewards for them were not bad, but there were very few merits, and he needed as many of them as possible, because 100 merits were exchanged for 1 starstone. Looking at the result of his research, Adrian began to doubt whether he should try tasks more difficult for his rank. And although he himself understood that he could easily cope with a task of a higher level, he doubted it only because its successful completion immediately after awakening would attract too much unnecessary attention. While he was under the wing of the Warriors Guild, no one could even lay a finger on him. But if he overdid it, ill-wishers would come from everywhere and still be able to get him. While flipping through the various tasks, Adrian suddenly came across something that caught his attention. Touching the hologram, the guy read about a task that was 2 ranks more difficult, but it only required exploring the surroundings of the forest nearby, and the reward promised as many as 20 merits. Taking a closer look at the picture that came with the assignment, Adrian noticed something interesting, deciding that the assignment seemed quite curious to him. After some time, Adrian arrived in the suburbs where some of the awakened lived and worked. After wandering around the area for a long time, the guy finally noticed a fork in the road and realized in which direction the moss forest was located, which became his new goal. At the moment when he was about to leave, the guy heard a loud voice from behind calling him by name. Turning around, he saw Rebecca in full battle gear, who, clearly delighted to meet a new acquaintance, asked him if he had accepted the same task with the moss forest as she had. At first, Adrian didn't even immediately remember the girl, but remembering how he helped her during the test, he awkwardly confirmed her guess. Clearly even more delighted, Rebecca immediately approached the guy almost point blank, asking if he would like to join her squad since they had come for the same mission, embarrassing Adrian himself quite a bit. A silhouette of a man suddenly appeared behind her, immediately bringing the girl down to earth with the statement that she should have first asked the squad leader before inviting someone to join the squad. Stepping into the light, the stocky man noted that for the E-rank squad, an EF rank hero would be a burden. But despite the unflattering comment, he still introduced himself as Mark Hoffman. Rebecca turned around and immediately began to protest, claiming that she did not consider Adrian a burden. The man who came up to him, hearing Adrian's name, called Mark a real ignoramus because Adrian was the one who, along with Rebecca, received a gold-rank talent in the recent test. Extending his hand for a handshake, the man introduced himself as Howard and noted that he was the squad's archer. Pleased by the polite attitude, Adrian shook Howard's hand with a smile and heard from him an invitation to join the squad. Dissatisfied with the commander's positive attitude towards the guy, Mark said that he did not see anything outstanding in the gold rank and only looked at the level. And for their squad, Adrian's level made him a burden. With one sharp shout, Howard silenced Mark, pointing out that the knight was talking complete nonsense. Embarrassed by such a pleasant attitude, Adrian accepted the invitation to join the squad and, trying not to pay attention to Mark, followed Howard, who led the squad straight to the moss forest. When the team finally entered the forest, the sky was covered by the crowns of mighty trees, whose trunks were intricately intertwined. As soon as they got deep enough, tree creatures began to emerge from the bushes, forcing the heroes to fight. Wanting to cover the combatants, Rebecca pulled the bowstring and aimed the flaming arrow towards the growling monsters. With one well-aimed shot, she hit one of the monsters, causing flames to immediately burst forth, engulfing its wooden body. And although the shot was accurate, and the flame clearly wounded the monster, it suddenly growled and extinguished it, turning to the one who had so suddenly carried out such a strong attack. The monster was already rushing straight at Rebecca, but Mark suddenly appeared between them, taking the monster's attack on his strong shield. Before Rebecca had time to prepare a new arrow, she noticed that Commander Howard was already preparing to shoot, calmly aiming at his enemy. The commander's no less accurate shot surprisingly caused much more damage, because upon impact the arrow suddenly exploded, showering not just one, but a group of tree monsters with bright flames. Deciding that the monsters were dead, Mark allowed himself to be distracted and turned to the commander to note how easily he dealt with the enemies. Thinking it was time for another cheeky comment, Mark turned to Adrian and once again noted that this task was too difficult for some F rank, which greatly offended Rebecca, who was standing nearby. The angry girl was indignant because the first arrow was fired from her bow, and she herself was only an F rank, which meant that Mark believed that she was not suitable for this task. But the guy protested, justifying himself by saying that he was only talking about Adrian. Dissatisfied with this attitude towards her comrade, Rebecca boldly put the knight in his place, noting that if he decides to continue to belittle Adrian, then next time let him think twice before speaking. At this time, the commander, who had not previously intervened in the squabble, suddenly turned around at the rustling in the bushes. Instantly assessing the situation, he shouted to his comrades, alerting them to the sudden ambush attack. Before she could dodge it, Rebecca barely noticed the sharp projectile flying towards her face and closed her eyes in panic. Without straining at all, Adrian intercepted the arrow with one deft movement and, clenching his fist, broke it into pieces, which surprised Rebecca quite a bit. Having thrown away the arrow fragments, the boy pointed towards the bushes from which the projectile had flown and shouted that that was where the attacker had been. The team's thief, named Gerald, instantly jumped onto the tree and rushed in the indicated direction right along the branches, promising to deal with the monster. In a couple of jumps, he caught up with the already fleeing tree monster with a bow in his hands and raised his blades to attack. It took him only a moment to cut the monster's entire body into pieces with a few attacks. The guy had already returned, landing springily on the clearing where the team was, and Rebecca at that time looked embarrassedly at Adrian, who was watching the thief's movements. The blushing girl looked away in embarrassment, thanking the guy for saving her, to which he smiled warmly, noting that they were, after all, one team. Mark, clearly angry, in a fit of jealousy towards the lovely archer, thought to himself that Adrian was surprisingly successful in finding ways to win the girl's favor. Having glanced at the knight without being noticed, Adrian looked away with a sigh, deciding to ignore him and thinking about everything that was happening to the forest. But there was clearly something wrong with him, and the guy felt it all too clearly. Adrian knew very well that the Stargate was not the only powerful spiritual force in this world, and that it was balanced by a powerful dark energy. He knew that the stronger the starlight, the greater the vibrations of darkness that awaken in living beings all that is most terrible and terrifying, turning them into monsters. And although the guy understood that because of this, there were more and more monsters in this forest, he was not interested in this at all, but in the fact that for this reason, among other things, more treasures appeared in the forest. Distracted from his thoughts, the guy turned his head and saw how the commander took out some kind of device with an antenna, obviously checking something. Having checked all the data, the man took out another device and installed it at the root of one of the trees, proudly telling the team that the last beacon had been installed, which meant that their task of exploring the forest had been completed perfectly. Realizing that they would now be heading back to the camp, Adrian even smiled, deciding to definitely secretly return here later alone in order to fulfill his own goals. However, here Mark spoke up, surprising the others by noting that he considered it inappropriate to return to the camp now. The guy reasonably noted that for a regular E-rank quest, they would receive too little to share the reward among everyone, and therefore he suggested moving a little deeper into the forest to find something more worthwhile. And although the commander was clearly not too pleased with such an initiative on the part of the impudent knight, he was forced to agree, realizing that his argument was quite weighty. In response to the question about objections, all members of the team, including a satisfied Mark, answered in unison that they did not dare disobey the commander. Apparently forgetting about Rebecca's warnings, Mark again allowed himself to make a sarcastic comment about Adrian's rank, suggesting that he leave the group since the task would become even more difficult for his level. In response, Adrian gave him a contemptuous look and a smile appeared on his face, because the guy understood that this arrogant knight would continue to try to find a reason to get rid of him. Still not having calmed down from the recent squabble, Rebecca again began to defend Adrian to Mark, claiming that his gold rank clearly proved his strength. However, now Commander Howard also expressed his opinion, interrupting Rebecca with regret in his voice and making it clear that this forest was indeed considered a very dangerous territory, and also that he was worried about their safety, and therefore considered Adrian's continued presence on the team reckless. Not expecting this from the commander, Rebecca was clearly at a loss, trying to find at least some argument in defense of her comrade, but there was only confusion in her eyes. And although she still didn't want to let Adrian leave the team, the guy himself suddenly said that he agreed with Howard, and therefore wanted to leave the squad, although in fact, he just wanted to quickly complete his own goals. Feeling guilty about the decision he was making, the commander approached Adrian and put his hand on his shoulder, asking for forgiveness for the fact that they were forced to part, and promising to share the reward for the mission already completed for the boy. At this time, Mark, who was observing the situation, smiled contentedly because he had achieved his goal and now no one would stop him from winning the heart of the beautiful archer. As the team moved forward, Adrian frowned, feeling the dark aura growing stronger and therefore worried that nothing would happen to his new comrades. There were 2 more members in the team, whose strength Adrian determined for sure, realizing that they were even stronger than Commander Howard, and therefore concluded that they were secret bodyguards, whose main task was to protect Rebecca. And although he was abandoned, Adrian smiled contentedly, glad that he was finally alone, which meant he could finally begin to carry out his own tasks. With one deft leap, the boy jumped over the tree root that blocked his path further into the forest. Having landed and looked around, he noticed that he felt a strong concentration of dark aura, which was felt here much more clearly than on the outskirts. As he was thinking to himself that monsters were drawn to an aura that echoed their nature, Adrian suddenly caught movement overhead and turned around to see a huge tree monster falling on him to finish him off. Using his archer's reflexes, Adrian easily spotted the attack and was ready to parry it. With a flick of his wrist, he used the blade fist skill to block the monster's attack. And just a moment later, he rushed forward and struck the monster, aiming at the body and wanting to cut it in two. However, although the blow was strong, it left only a large wound on the living tree, which greatly surprised Adrian himself. The monster swung again, wanting to finish off the intruder, and Adrian thought sadly that using a full 70% of his strength, he was only able to wound the monster. With a quick dash, the boy dodged the barrage of attacks intended to kill him and agreed with the thought that this would also be enough if he knew well who he was fighting. Standing firmly on both feet, Adrian snapped his fingers and used his mage abilities to instantly summon a small cloud of flame onto them. In one smooth motion, the boy pierced the cloud of flame with the blade fist, causing it to envelop his entire arm. And although the monster, having caught its breath, immediately rushed at the guy, he was ready to accept the attack and show something interesting. Rushing forward, the guy slipped under the enemy's blow and slashed his blade across the torso, causing the monster to immediately catch fire. Looking at the smoldering body of the already dead monster, Adrian allowed himself to relax a little and smiled at his own understanding that using his own ingenuity and knowing the weaknesses of the enemy, he could deal with any monster. And although he won this fight, the joy quickly faded, because Adrian realized that he spent much more spiritual energy on this fight than he wanted. Frowning, the guy summed up sadly that he should learn new skills as soon as possible, otherwise he wouldn't go far. Suddenly, a sphere of his soul flew out of his smoldering body, full of energy, which Adrian immediately noticed. At the same moment, this sphere flew up to his mouth and Adrian, opening it, swallowed it, feeling how his whole body was once again saturated with energy. Adrian straightened up again and smiled, glad that he had received such a useful talent, allowing him to absorb the souls of defeated enemies, not only restoring the strength spent in battle, but also becoming even stronger. Approaching the ashes of the defeated enemy, Adrian noticed something unusual and knelt down next to the curious object. Picking up a stone full of dark energy from the ground, Adrian noted with some interest that the further he moved into the forest, the more often he found similar stones in the corpses of defeated monsters. Having examined the next stone from all sides, the guy remembered that he had read that such stones contain the energy of stars, although 10 times less than in starstones, And in addition to this energy, they are filled with a dark aura, which makes them dangerous for ordinary people. Smiling at the unexpected discovery, the guy thought that for any awakened person, the stones would be absolutely useless. But for him, this was far from the case. Sitting in the lotus position, Adrian concentrated on the stone, and it floated in the air right above his palm, sparkling with the energy that overflowed it. As luck would have it, Adrian knew a special technique that allowed him to get rid of the dark aura inside the stone and cleanse the energy of the stars that the guy himself could absorb. And so he clenched his fist and smashed the stone into small pieces. While he was busy cleansing and absorbing energy, several more tree monsters were hiding in the bushes not far from him. Naturally, the archer's reflexes helped the guy spot them, and so, having quickly finished his ritual, he even smiled, realizing that he would now receive even more of the stones he needed. Standing up straight, he once again combined the blade fist technique and magic flame, preparing to take on even multiple enemies at once. If he had looked around, he would have seen that the monsters had truly surrounded him and were already about to feast on his flesh, but the guy was not going to give them that opportunity. Filled with a thirst for a good fight, the boy himself rushed into the attack, showering his enemies with a flurry of fiery blows that left horrific wounds on the tree monsters. Those who survived Adrian's attacks were no longer able to fight, but most were instantly covered in flames, devouring the monsters' wooden bodies in an instant. Adrian felt unrivaled as he recalled those exciting times when, as a god warrior, he had fought entire armies single-handedly. And the thought of this almost cost him his life, because in an instant he discovered that someone else's claws were a couple of centimeters from his face. Using all his reflexes, Adrian managed to dodge, causing the enemy attack to fly past. The flame around his hand died down, and Adrian found himself at a relatively safe distance from the monsters in a couple of jumps, realizing that he had forgotten himself too much in the heat of battle. And although he dealt with them well, it did not escape his notice that the monsters were becoming more and more numerous. However, Adrian was not going to give in so easily to some tree monsters, and so he summoned the souls of already fallen monsters in order to replenish his strength and rush into battle again. Having regained his energy, Adrian felt as if he had not been fighting for the last few minutes, but had been relaxing and resting, and therefore was full of strength to continue the fight. Dodging deadly attacks, the guy spun around in a fiery whirlwind, burning more and more monsters that were rushing towards him for their own death. After a few minutes of fierce fighting, Adrian was finally able to breathe, looking with a smile at the smoldering corpses surrounding him, from which dark stones were pouring out, which the guy picked up and cleaned with pleasure, intending to absorb. Suddenly, the archer's reflexes kicked in again, drawing the boy's attention to the unnatural phenomenon. Turning around, he saw how the corpses of the defeated enemies suddenly rose into the air and flew away somewhere into the thicket of the forest. Frowning, Adrian voiced the thought out loud that everything that was happening in this forest seemed stranger and stranger to him. Looking around, the guy listened to the rustling of branches and leaves around him, expecting that something would jump out at him again. However, without waiting for danger, the guy straightened up and looked at the tree closest to him, which seemed to be moving. At the same moment he noticed this, the branches of this tree began to close around him with incredible speed, as if they wanted to squeeze him between themselves. Not wanting such a death for himself, the boy once again used the blade fist skill to defend himself from the sudden attack. The window created with the skill was just enough to dodge the attack, and so the branches only grabbed the stone next to which the guy was standing, crushing it into small stones. Jumping out of the tenacious grip, the guy noticed that the power of even an ordinary tree in this forest was simply amazing. And although just a few minutes ago Adrian had dealt with a whole group of tree creatures, now seeing a mighty living tree, he understood that he could not do anything to it, being only an F-rank warrior. Realizing the full extent of his own powerlessness before this terrifying creature, the guy admitted without a shadow of joy that he could only dodge in order not to be killed. Standing up straight, ready to defend himself, Adrian used one of the techniques he learned in his past life to gain an advantage. The technique slowed down all the processes inside the guy's body, which made the movements almost invisible to the eye, and therefore the guy now seemed like a statue, which could have helped greatly if the tree had been guided by the movements. Deciding that due to the lack of eyes, the trees were detecting vibrations from movements when choosing a direction of attack, and therefore his plan worked perfectly. Being motionless, Adrian only moved his eyes, trying to find a way out of the difficult situation and at the same time reasoning that the forest had mutated too much due to the dark energy. Realizing that only the destruction of the source of this dark energy could save the forest, the guy estimated the size of its territory and sighed sadly, realizing that the search would take a very long time. At one point, the archer's reflexes helped the guy notice another sharp movement of the branches, which suddenly rushed straight towards him, which Adrian did not expect at all. However, believing in his plan, the guy remained motionless, and the branches flew past him, clearly aiming at something else. A loud slashing sound echoed through the forest as branches rushed towards something humanoid, rapidly running away from danger. The small tree humanoid ran away in panic from the branches of a mighty tree that wanted to tear it to pieces. Adrian looked in the direction from which the sounds of destruction were coming and peered at the small silhouette, cowering in fear of death. Clutching his head, the baby tried to hide from the frightening branches, making plaintive sounds reminiscent of the crackling of bushes. Apparently, these sounds and the baby's trembling were clearly felt by the tree, and therefore the branches again rushed straight at him, wanting to tear him into small planks. A terrible cracking sound was heard throughout the forest as the branches slammed into their target. However, there was no small tree creature at the place of impact, because Adrian, having jumped up from his place, reached it in one jump and having picked it up, carried it away from the terrible tree. The branches scoured the area of the impact, wanting to find the baby's body and swallow it. But there was nothing there except for destroyed soil and stones. Opening his eyes, the little tree boy raised a pitiful and terribly frightened look at the one who saved him. Using the technique again, Adrian slowed his movements so as not to suddenly find himself under attack from the branches again, and the baby in his arms again began to chatter something in his tree language. Slowly lowering his gaze and making sure that the branches did not react to this, Adrian spoke quietly, noting that a large amount of stellar energy could be felt in the baby, untouched by the dark aura, and then asked if he understood his savior. Smiling rather sweetly, the baby began to chatter affirmatively and nodded his head, making it clear that he understood everything perfectly. Smiling, Adrian noticed that the rescued creature was quite smart, because it not only understood his speech, but even thanked him for saving it. Deciding to take a risk, the boy asked the kid directly if he knew where the source of the dark aura was in this forest, to which the creature nodded vigorously. Turning around, the little one pointed somewhere further into the forest, clearly wanting to help his savior. Delighted with an unexpected ally, the guy was honestly surprised that this kid not only knew where the source of the aura was, but also hurried him. Having looked around and realized that the branches of the living tree were quite far away, the guy gathered his strength and rushed forward in the direction where the tree crumb was pointing him. Somewhere in another part of the forest, several tree creatures were vigorously attacking a bulky shield protected by an unusual aura. Holding back the enemy's onslaught, Mark shouted to the commander that he was ready to maneuver. At the same moment, an arrow shrouded in the magician's flame flew towards him, which, flying past his shoulder, pierced one of the creatures and instantly exploded, without touching the knight covered by the shield. However, one of the creatures suddenly jumped out of the column of flame, unwounded by it, and rushed at the magician. And at that very moment, he was shot down in mid-flight by a well-aimed shot from a fiery arrow fired from Commander Gordon's bow. Turning to face the team, Mark noticed the commander's face, tense from sudden danger, having just saved the life of an ally. Relaxing, the knight approached Rebecca, who had been closely following the progress of the battle the entire time, and told her to be sure to remember how to properly deal with such monsters, not forgetting to note that without the burden of Adrian, they were moving much faster. Frowning in displeasure and still angry that Adrian had been kicked out on his initiative, Rebecca cast a displeased glance at the guy, wondering how he could act so arrogantly. And although she honestly tried to think about the enemies and the mission, her thoughts returned to Adrian again, and the girl thought with embarrassment that his powers were clearly much more powerful than he showed in teamwork. Suddenly, Gerald, looking somewhere towards the trees, called out to the commander, claiming that he felt that something was wrong. Turning to Howard, the thief pointed to the battlefield, where there were no bodies of slain monsters left. With a slight but obvious tremor in his voice, the guy, alerted, pointed out this fact to the commander. Gerald noticed some movement out of the corner of his eye and suggested that the forest was swallowing up the bodies of the monsters, and when he looked up, he saw that the branches of the huge trees surrounding them seemed to have come to life. Mark looked up in surprise and was stunned to see some branches rushing towards him with extraordinary speed. In an instant, strong and thick branches entwined the body of the knight, who screamed out pleas for help towards his commander. However, before anyone could react, the branches suddenly contracted, squeezing the body of the impudent knight, causing blood to spill out of his mouth, and Mark himself let out an inhuman cry full of pain. Commander Howard was about to rush to help his comrade, but he realized that he was too late, and so he took a step back, approaching his allies, clenching his jaw tensely. Clutching his bow tightly, he tried to understand what was going on around him as his team formed a defensive circle. Casting a sad glance at the dead Mark, Howard suddenly noticed how smaller branches were entwining his body from head to toe. The knight's body changed. His skin turned gray and his eyeballs turned black, and the corpse began to speak in a hoarse voice, turning towards his former comrades, threatening them with death for invading the territory of the dark forces. With pain in his eyes, Howard looked at what his comrade had become, regretting that he had not been able to save him, and summing up that the demonic tree had devoured Mark's soul and taken his body. Rebecca panicked and asked how it was possible that an E-rank tree could kill an awakened of the same level so easily, but the demonic knight had already rushed to attack his former comrades. Understanding that it was no longer Mark in front of him, Commander Howard pulled the bowstring and aimed a flaming arrow at the monster, intending to end its life this time forever. The arrow flew at incredible speed straight toward the monster, ready to burn it to the ground. However, the monster, using the wooden branches that had become intertwined with him, managed to intercept the arrow and laughed with a demonic smile at the commander's pathetic attempt to finish off his former comrade. Howard froze in shock, unable to understand how his most powerful attack, which had so easily dealt with the wooden monsters, did not cause any damage now. And the demon, at this time taking advantage of the squad leader's confusion, rushed into the attack, ready to kill not only Howard, but the entire squad. For the first time in a long time, Commander Howard truly felt fear, taking his breath away and freezing his body, so he didn't even hear Rebecca screaming at him to get away. Frozen in place, the man only had time to think about dodging, but was unable to move a single muscle. And although Howard could not defend himself in any way, the monster was suddenly blown away from the man by a blade-like gust of wind, summoned from somewhere near Rebecca. Covering itself with its mangled hands, the monster jumped back a few steps, never reaching the commander with its razor-sharp claws. At the same moment as the blow reached the monster, the commander was picked up in one jump and carried even further away from the monster by Gerald, who suddenly appeared nearby. Leaving the commander in safety, the guy straightened up and approached the one who had caused that gust of wind of incredible strength. And Howard himself, realizing that the spell of the gust of wind belonged to the D rank, asked if their comrades belonged to that very rank. All this time, the mage named Matthew, who had been helping only with low-ranking spells, threw back his hood and admitted with a sigh that he hadn't wanted him and Gerald to be discovered so easily. Rebecca, who had begun to guess what was happening, looked at the thief and the magician, wanting to ask the question that had suddenly appeared in her head. But Matthew interrupted her. With a quick glance of his golden eyes at the girl, the man confirmed her unspoken guess, saying that they were sent by Rebecca's family in order to protect her. The archer's gaze clearly showed pain, which arose from the realization that even her own family did not believe in her powers. Realizing that now was not the time for conversation, Gerald rushed into battle, assuring his ward that everything would be fine and entrusting cover to his faithful companion the mage, who was already casting a new spell. At the same moment as the thief's blades clashed with the monster's now incredibly powerful arms, the mage finished casting his spell and another windy attack struck the enemy, causing the sound of an explosion to resound throughout the forest. Even despite the teamwork of the powerful tandem of the D-rank mage and thief, who were covered by two archers, the monster skillfully fought 1 against 4, which caused great bewilderment to Gerald, who was starting to run out of steam. The exhausted archers were breathing heavily. Matthew was clutching his wounded side, and Gerald was clutching his blades with his already very sore hands, not intending to give up. It turned out that the tree that killed Mark and merged with his body changed his body worse and worse with each passing second, turning him into not just a monster, but a real tree demon, whose thirst for blood was evident in every movement and even look. Even the unwounded monster suddenly roared, and its already powerful body became much stronger in appearance than it had been. Realizing that the battle was going against the team, Matthew made a difficult decision, intending to protect Rebecca at all costs, and therefore, folding his hand into an unusual symbol, the man began to use a new spell and asked Rebecca to run when it was ready. Looking around at her exhausted team, Rebecca, who was also quite tired, tried to disagree, realizing that without her, the squad's remaining chances of survival would be completely lost. At the same moment when she tried to voice the reason for her refusal, Matthew used a spell, causing 2 gusts of wind of incredible strength to cut through the huge roots in their path and rushed towards the girl. And as soon as the magical wind reached the archer, it suddenly began to spin, gently picking her up and lifting her into the air, dragging her somewhere deep into the forest away from the battle. The girl, who had fallen to her knees far from the battlefield, raised her head, shocked that she had been treated like this, and although she wanted to return as quickly as possible, a sudden crunch of branches from the side made her turn her head towards the bushes from which other monsters were running towards her. Realizing that she couldn't cope alone, Rebecca took one last sad look at the battlefield and, turning sharply, ran as far as possible from the monsters attacking her. But even though she was far away from the most terrifying monster, her strength began to leave her, causing the archer to panic, realizing that she was about to fall. Realizing that she couldn't escape, the girl turned around to make a last desperate attempt to defend herself. But before her eyes, another monster was already rushing at her, baring its sharp claws and preparing to tear the fragile archer to pieces. Tears began to flow down the girl's cheeks from the fear that paralyzed her mind, and she muttered in a trembling voice, apologizing to those who had given their last strength to save her. Trying to cover herself with her hands from the attacking monster, the girl closed her eyes, realizing that she was about to die. But at that very moment, something suddenly attacked the monsters, dousing each of them with uncontrollable flames, causing the creatures to scream loudly. Hearing the screams, the girl opened her eyes and looked to see what had happened. But when she saw the one who had protected her, she widened her eyes in shock. Standing at his full height, Adrian turned his head towards Rebecca, wanting to assess whether she was injured, although the girl herself was looking at him with much more curiosity, because his hand was blazing with both flame and unusual pink energy. Turning his head back towards the enemies, Adrian concentrated and asked the girl what had happened to them, since she found herself alone against 3 monsters. The girl, amazed by the sight, looked at Adrian without looking away, and instead of answering, she only asked in a trembling voice how he was able to so easily deal with 3 E-rank monsters on his own. Sighing, the boy glanced at the new creatures that had come closer, growling towards the couple and wanting to kill both of them. Realizing that it would be much more difficult for him to fight and protect Rebecca at the same time, Adrian decided that it would be much better to use a different strategy. And so, with a smooth movement, he placed his hand on the archer's waist, pulling her towards him, which caused incredible embarrassment on the part of the girl. The girl tried to object to such an unexpected close contact, but Adrian interrupted her, giving her a hard look and threatening that if she did not shut up, he himself would throw her to be eaten. Looking around, Rebecca panicked again, whispering that the monsters were heading straight for them, to which Adrian suddenly released the blue aura that was already familiar to this forest, which slowed down their movements. Immediately after this, the monsters, who had been running straight towards the couple, for some reason ran past and then stopped altogether, looking around in confusion in search of the prey that had suddenly disappeared, which greatly surprised Rebecca, who realized that the monsters did not see them at all. Rebecca, embarrassed again, looked at the guy again, thinking that this was the skill he received for passing the gold rank test. And although Adrian tried to concentrate on the enemies, he couldn't help but notice that the girl for some reason pressed herself even closer to him, which greatly embarrassed the guy. Eventually, when the monsters had dispersed, Adrian led Rebecca somewhere deep into the forest, where they found a safe enough place for them to rest. Sitting down under the roots of a large but lifeless tree, Adrian sighed, leaning back on the roots, and again asked what had happened to the squad. Having scorched the girl with a stern look, he asked directly how she could have gotten lost alone in the forest if there were 2 awakened D-ranks in their team. Rebecca, who had been confused until then, opened her eyes in surprise because she had not expected that Adrian was so strong that he could easily understand the level of strength of those about whom she herself knew nothing. Shaking her head and throwing out her embarrassment in front of the guy who saved her, the girl indignantly asked how he knew that their comrades were of higher rank. The guy, who did not give in to pressure, said directly that he had eyes, and he simply could not help but notice this fact. Without taking his stern gaze off Rebecca, the guy said that they weren't even particularly hiding, because even before the guy left, they had boldly used their abilities, and the archer simply hadn't noticed. The guy harshly scolded the girl because she is a gold rank archer, which means she should have noticed it herself. But Rebecca turned out to be so inept that she missed simple information that was right under her nose. Hugging her knees and closing her eyes, the girl sobbed, agreeing with the guy's words in a trembling voice and confirming that she was weak, because if she were stronger, she would not be a burden to her comrades. Even seeing how upset the girl was, Adrian did not allow himself to show pity, and still looking sternly at her with his green eyes, the guy harshly noted that tears would not help the matter, and instead, it would be better if she finally told him what happened. For a couple more seconds, the archer couldn't control her tears, and when she finally came to her senses a little, she spoke, telling Adrian about everything that had happened to them. Having listened to her to the end without interrupting, the guy nodded, thinking about everything he had heard and collecting his thoughts. Wiping away her tears, the girl told Adrian that his movement-slowing skills were incredibly useful against these monsters, and therefore they should quickly go to the camp so that with his help, stronger comrades could save their squad. The guy looked up and looked at her as if she had said the stupidest thing in history, and then asked her point blank if she seriously thought the commander and the others would need help if they went for reinforcements. And although he said that even an awakened E rank could handle it if he approached it correctly, he had to admit to himself that an unprepared team with only 2 awakened D ranks would hardly survive a direct confrontation with the black tree. Rebecca regretfully admitted that after the tree killed Mark and took over his body, even the well-coordinated tandem of 2 awakened D ranks was useless. Finally, having received all the necessary information, the guy put his hands on the ground and stood up, finally getting ready to get down to business. Turning to Rebecca, who was still sitting on the ground, Adrian called her to follow him, asking her to take him to where the battle was so that they could provide support to the squad. At this time, on the battlefield, gusts of wind swirling into a whirlwind cut through the air around them. Mark, now a demonic beast, rained down a barrage of incredible attacks on the magical barrier, wanting to get to what it was covering. The wounded Matthew, whose face was covered in bruises, held his hand in front of him and looked forward firmly, maintaining the spell with the last of his strength, because he understood that if the wind weakened, because of which both the magician himself and his unconscious comrades would be instantly killed. At this time, Adrian, holding Rebecca in his arms, landed on a branch nearby and looked around the battlefield, where the demon was still attacking the vortex defense. Surrounded by an aura that slowed their movements, they looked around the battlefield, realizing that the situation was dire, and Rebecca decided to ask Adrian if he had any plan. The girl was firmly convinced that Adrian would be able to deal with this monster, but the guy interrupted her and, throwing a sad look, confidently said that he could not cope on his own. But Rebecca could. Remembering how the last battle ended, the archer was surprised by Adrian's statement, because she doubted that she could even cope with simple tree monsters, let alone this demon. Looking sternly into her eyes again, the boy directly said that she should learn to use her gift received from the gold rank test as soon as possible. In a harsh voice, the boy mentioned that she had never used a single skill yet, which made him doubt whether she deserved her gold rank. Turning to the monster, the boy summed up that she needed to learn to use her skill right now if she wanted to save the commander and those who were ready to give their own lives for her. And although the girl received her skill on the same day as Adrian, she guiltily looked away and then looked at him again and asked him to teach her. Sighing, the boy softened his voice and said that she should use her heart, and that was where she would find the answer to this question. Closing her eyes, the girl tried to concentrate, and after a couple of seconds, her eyes, from which a golden glow emanated, opened wide, and a golden mark lit up on her forehead. Looking into the archer's eyes, the guy immediately realized that she had received the Eagle's Eye skill, which is considered very strong among all gold-ranked skills. Having looked at the girl, in whom there was no trace of embarrassment or awkwardness left, the guy even thought with some pride that she was strong enough to reach S rank under his mentorship faster than in 10 years. But just a second after thinking about the idea of mentoring, the guy looked away and frowned, not understanding why he was thinking about it again, because the student from his past life betrayed him. Rebecca, at this time, not noticing the expression on the guy's face and not hearing a word from him in response to the awakening of her skill, turned her gaze to the monster below and said with enthusiasm that she had finally seen what she wanted. The eagle eye skill allowed her to clearly see the monstrous aura of the entire 10 black trees that had engulfed Mark's body. Adrian gently guided and pointed out that she needed to give it her all and see much more than she was seeing at the moment. The girl tensed up and her eyes shone even brighter when she said that she would definitely try for the sake of her commander and comrades. The mark also shone brighter, and the girl was able to catch all the streams of aura, not only emanating from the monster's body, but also flowing directly into it. She was able to clearly see not only the terrifying red aura around the monster, but even a dark aura of incredible volume concentrated in one point. Having heard enough, Adrian noted that it was this dark aura that was the cause of all the terrible things that were happening to the forest. The boy himself examined the monster, telling the girl that the power of 10 black trees in one knight's body was too colossal to fight with it fairly, but it could be attacked in its weak spot. Reacting instantly to the guy's words, Rebecca immediately pulled out her bow and pulled a flaming arrow, aiming at the weak spot and claiming that she would now complete the task. However, Adrian managed to prevent the girl's thoughtless act, ordering her not to act smart and flicking her on the forehead. The guy scolded her with displeasure, saying that she was only an F-rank archer and her arrow would never penetrate the defense of such a strong creature, but would only attract his attention. Rubbing her bruised forehead, the girl guiltily lowered her gaze and asked for forgiveness for her recklessness, asking him to teach her how to act correctly. The guy sighed and closed his eyes in disappointment, claiming that it was precisely because of this recklessness and inattention that their squad got into such trouble, after which he asked her if she saw another way to solve the problem. Finally, Rebecca smiled, saying that she understood what Adrian meant. Snatching an ice arrow from her quiver, the girl activated the skill again to aim more accurately and pointed the tip at the monster. A moment later, realizing that Adrian was not stopping her, she relaxed her fingers on the bowstring, and the arrow immediately flew off, flying at great speed straight into the monster. The monster, unable to react, let out a loud cry of pain as the ice arrow hit its weak spot, where the ice immediately enveloped its body, making the wooden shell brittle. Following one arrow, a second one flew in, causing even more damage and not allowing the monster to recover. Finally, the last third arrow hit the target, causing almost the entire body of the demon to become covered in an icy crust, and incredible pain was clearly visible in his eyes. As soon as the last arrow hit the target, Adrian immediately tensed up and covered the hand holding the blade in flames, not forgetting to use the fist blade skill. The happy girl exclaimed in delight that she had managed to carry out a successful attack on the demon, and Adrian smiled proudly, supporting her enthusiasm. Turning to the guy and seeing his smile, Rebecca instantly blushed, after which she thanked Adrian, calling him brother for the first time. And although she was glad that she had succeeded, she understood that the ice arrow would not hold the monster for long, which she immediately told her comrade. Having prepared for the attack, Adrian suddenly jumped from the branch and rushed straight at the monster with the aim of destroying both it and all the dark aura that had accumulated in its body. Watching the guy rush into the attack, Rebecca voiced her thoughts that the guy, although he was trying to look stern and indifferent, was actually very kind. In an instant, Adrian found himself right on the battlefield. But to the archer's surprise, instead of saving his wounded comrades, he rushed straight at the monster, clearly intending to engage in battle with it. Rebecca screamed in panic, trying to stop the guy from doing what she thought was a stupid thing, because his defense was incredibly strong and F-rank would never be able to break through it. She knew that if he couldn't break through the monster's thick wooden armor, he would be the one to take the hit. But Adrian's gaze said more clearly than any words that he wouldn't stop. The guy understood perfectly well that the archer was right, and that Mark, who had become a monster, might not be very strong on his own, but his wooden armor, supported by a dark aura, made him almost invulnerable. However, Adrian took all these details into account and had a plan to fight this monster, and so his hand caught fire again. Realizing that the ice arrows had made the monster's shell fragile, the boy lit his other hand as well, much stronger than before. With both fists, Adrian struck straight at the monster's open weak spot, covered in ice so thick that the boy would be able to break through such a strong defense. The sudden change in temperature intensified the blow even more, causing the monster to scream in incredible pain. When Adrian suddenly pulled his fists out of the monster's body, The two elements reacted so violently that a huge column of flame burst out of the demon's body. Even though Rebecca had watched the entire battle, she admired Adrian for breaking through the monster's defense, but she couldn't understand how he had done it. Taking a closer look at the monster with her skill, Rebecca saw a purple dark core suddenly emerge from the monster's belly, which she guessed was the source of the dark aura. Without stopping his movement, Adrian took out his blade and surrounded it with flames along with the energy of his blade fist to perform the final destructive attack. Rushing towards the enemy, the guy cut his body with several powerful blows right in the place where the core affected by the dark aura was located. Looking at the place of impact, the guy noticed with satisfaction that the core had split into several pieces. At the same moment, the wooden shell of the monster began to split and fall to the ground, releasing Mark's body outside. It turned out that Mark did not die in that attack of the tree, and all this time was inside the tree shell, being alive. And now, having climbed out, exhausted, he muttered something unintelligible. When his gaze focused, he saw Adrian in front of him and immediately shouted at him in rage, calling him a real bastard. Casting a look of contempt at the boy, Adrian smirked and responded insolently, calling the knight a brat who couldn't resist the darkness. Without pitying the boy, Adrian sternly noted that knights, due to their powerful will, have an advantage against the forces of evil and should be the least prone to the influence of monsters. But the black trees were able to take advantage of Mark due to spiritual weakness. Pressing his hand to his aching head, Mark gave the boy a tired but still angry look as memories suddenly began to appear in his head one after another, revealing to him the whole truth about what had happened to him. Having considered his guesses and the actual events, the guy decided that Adrian had set everything up in revenge for being expelled from the group, and so, in a fit of anger, he rushed at the guy. Adrian sighed heavily and once again called Mark an idiot, because his actions and thoughts were very contrary to common sense. With one deft movement of his hands, Adrian easily knocked the useless knight off his feet and flipped him over in the air, deciding to finally neutralize him. As soon as Mark lost consciousness, a dark crystal suddenly materialized in the air next to him. With a heavy sigh, Adrian spat on the ground next to the unconscious knight, noting that his soul was terribly envious and ignorant, and therefore it was not surprising that his body was taken by darkness. Looking down, the guy saw the crystal that had appeared when the monster that had enslaved Mark died, and picked it up, glad to see at least one positive in such an unpleasant situation. Holding it in his hand, Adrian assessed the stone and realized that it was much better than all the ones he had gotten from killing ordinary tree monsters. Having concentrated his aura, the guy noted, not without irony, that the dark aura without a master was trying to subjugate him, and then relaxedly clenched his fist, grinding the crystal and releasing its energy for subsequent purification and use. As Adrian absorbed the energy, he looked around and noticed that the branches and leaves of the black trees around him began to dry out and the aura began to weaken. Rebecca, who had been at a safe distance all this time, realizing that she was now in no danger, jumped from the branch and rushed to her comrades as soon as the magical wind weakened and released 3 almost lifeless bodies. The girl felt the pulse of the magician, who had completely lost all his strength, but who had so steadfastly defended his comrades until he lost consciousness, and summed up with a sigh that everyone was alive, but absolutely exhausted. Turning to Adrian, Rebecca thanked him from the bottom of her heart, admitting that without him and his help, they would all be dead here. Coming close to the archer, Adrian looked into her eyes and said with a smile that simple gratitude would not be enough for him, which again caused a blush to appear on the girl's cheeks. Rebecca, taken aback by the guy's pressure, even trembled with embarrassment, as did her voice when she tried to find out what he was talking about, although she herself had already thought of something extremely indecent. Noticing the changes in the girl's behavior, but not understanding what caused them, the guy looked at the archer more sternly now and asked if he remembered what he told her during the talent test. Dumbfounded by the realization that she had misunderstood everything, Rebecca, upset, remembered that then Adrian had asked her to keep everything a secret, and this time, it turned out, he asked the same thing. Having praised her for her intelligence, the guy put his hands in his pockets and casually walked away from the clearing, telling the girl that it was now safe here, and she had better not go anywhere while he was busy. The archer asked what business he might have now, to which the guy calmly and relaxedly said that he was going further into the forest to destroy the dark filth to the end. A shocked Rebecca, who thought that the core in Mark's body was the source of the dark aura around him, wanted to ask again, but Adrian had already left. Just in case, using the slow motion technique again, Adrian moved through the forest, guided by his own feelings. Looking at the trees around, the guy noticed that all the trees affected by the darkness began to dry up, which only confirmed his guess that with the destruction of that core, there was much less darkness in the forest. Suddenly, from under Adrian's suit, the same little boy he had recently saved from the black trees appeared. Before this, Adrian had been walking straight where this very little boy had pointed until he heard the sounds of carnage, which forced him to turn away. But now, after stroking the little one on the top of his head, the boy asked him to show him again where to go. Pleased that he was safe and being petted, the baby happily helped the boy again, pointing him to where the main source of the dark aura was. Having covered a great distance in the direction the tree child had pointed, the boy finally reached a truly colossal tree, whose top was without a single leaf and whose branches were blacker than night. Looking around, Adrian noted out loud that there was a terrible stench of rot around, and the dark aura was felt much stronger. But the guy also felt something unusual. Stretching his paw towards the tree, the baby summoned a stream of green energy, which was immediately picked up by several leaves from the ground. Smoothly, as if on waves, the energy flowed to the tree and touched it and was absorbed into the mighty trunk, and all the leaves weakly fell to the ground. As if alive, the tree's roots suddenly began to move, but without the threat of other trees, opening a passage to the awakened one's heart of the tree. Glad to have such a useful little fellow as an ally, Adrian smiled and moved inside the tree, noting that without him he would never have been able to get here. When the boy entered, the roots began to move again, this time closing the passage, and Adrian asked the little one if this was where he himself had appeared. The guy reinforced his question with stroking, and the baby in response again chattered something in his own language, unfortunately incomprehensible to Adrian. Adrian, in turn, having decided that this was an affirmative answer, wondered how such a sweet and kind creature could appear from a place struck by a dark aura. Having moved inside the tree for quite a long time, Adrian suddenly thought that during the entire journey he had not felt a single monster. Finally, the guy noticed something that looked like an exit from a long wooden tunnel stretching forward and hurried there, wanting to finish this matter as soon as possible. However, when Adrian approached the exit of the tunnel, what he saw was too much of a surprise for him. Inside the tree, there was something that looked very much like a human settlement. But this village was abandoned and there were no signs of life around. And although the creation was clearly man-made, Adrian noted that for a human, this village looked quite unusual, and he also doubted that it was the source of erosion, because he did not feel any dark energy around the settlement. However, having gone deeper into the settlement, the guy suddenly noticed an unusual aura, which by its very appearance evoked a feeling of danger. Having decided to investigate the discovered phenomenon, the guy used one of his techniques to properly examine the surrounding space in the manner of anomalies. Waves of energy spread out from him along the walls and the ground, and then returned, revealing to the guy more and more clear information about the energy surrounding this place. At one point, Adrian turned sharply in the direction from which one of the waves brought a feeling of strong, dark energy that would cause great fear in any other person. Looking sullenly into the bushes, from where shining red eyes full of rage were looking at him, the guy admitted that this aura was too powerful, and he would not be able to cope with it, even if he was an F rank. The guy thought sadly that he was literally just a little bit short of rank increase, and then he remembered that he had saved one of the especially strong crystals of dark energy and decided to use it, hoping that this stone would be enough to increase the rank. The only thing the guy doubted was that he would be able to absorb such a large amount of energy at once. But suddenly, a tree baby crawled out from under the suit and attracted Adrian's attention. Looking at the little one, Adrian noticed that he was saying something in his own language, pointing somewhere to the side and asked if he wanted them to go there. The kid nodded vigorously, and his expression showed some alarm, which made the boy wonder if his little friend felt the same terrifying aura that he himself felt. Throwing these thoughts aside and not taking his eyes off the terrifying aura, Adrian agreed with the baby, deciding once again to go where he pointed. Walking a little further into the village, bypassing the place from which the terrifying aura was felt, Adrian suddenly came out of the cave where the settlement began and saw a small tree standing close to a flimsy fence. Boldly jumping from the boy's arms, the baby approached the small tree, looking at it with care and affection, and touched its trunk. again causing smooth streams of green energy to merge with the internal energy of the tree. Flowing inside the tree, the energy reached the branches and divided into several streams, which, having been released outside, transformed into spheres floating in the air with images that turned out to be the memories of the Ents. Looking into the spheres, the boy saw in them how life in this village had been in full swing in the past. Adrian saw a peaceful colony of Ents, whose faces were framed by smiles, and realized that it was they who built this small settlement. The boy saw how these creatures cared for nature and coexisted with it in peace and order, and therefore did not understand what could have happened that now this forest is in such decline. Looking from one sphere to another, the guy searched for an answer but did not find one, and at one point, they began to tear apart, which is why Adrian lost the ability to understand what had happened. Hearing the little boy calling him, the boy was distracted from his thoughts and dropped to one knee to understand what the little boy was telling him. And the little boy, in turn, was actively moving his hands, making it clear that he wanted Adrian to find out what happened to the villagers. When the little boy noticed that his big friend understood the request, he folded his arms and made a pitiful expression on his face, showing with his whole appearance how much he needed Adrian's help. Naturally, after such invaluable help from the little one himself, Adrian could not help but agree, but immediately added that there had been no living people here for a long time, and therefore there was nothing to count on. The baby looked very upset and desperate, and Adrian picked up the baby and pressed him to his shoulder, hugging him tightly to calm him down. Satisfied that the baby was holding on tightly, Adrian jumped over the fence, expressing aloud the hope that the villagers remained alive. However, what he saw left him speechless, as any hopes for an optimal outcome instantly evaporated. There were bodies of slain Ents lying all around, each of them killed with varying degrees of brutality, but most had in common that they had been torn apart, causing the ground to be littered with splinters. As soon as the baby saw such a horrific picture, tears and hysteria immediately burst out, because the little one lost all his relatives on this land that smelled of death. Adrian covered the baby's eyes to block the view of his family's corpses, regretfully asking him not to look. Realizing that he couldn't leave the little Ents family members like this, Adrian spent a lot of time burying each of them, and then patiently and pitifully waited for the baby to be able to say goodbye. Looking sadly at the baby, the guy thought that he would not calm down soon because he was still just a child, and such a trauma was too much for him now. Finally, the boy sighed and turned away, deciding that it was better to leave the baby alone now and he himself would go and destroy what had caused such tragic events. However, as soon as he turned around, the little one jumped onto his shoulder with a furious expression on his face, which greatly surprised the guy. Looking at the baby, Adrian saw in his eyes a warrior's determination and a strong thirst for revenge for his relatives. And although Adrian understood that this lesson was too harsh for the kid, the boy stroked him on the top of the head, noting out loud that now he understood that good must be repaid with good, and evil with evil. Returning, Adrian stopped when he felt the dark aura of death again, and suggested that the baby look around as if something unusual was happening. Looking in the direction where he saw the terrifying cruel gaze, the guy did not find anyone there and moved on, reaching the place where the dark aura was felt so clearly that it was powerfully felt by the skin. Having concentrated an aura of slowing down the flow of energy around himself for less visibility, the guy rushed forward, and a dark fog instantly surrounded him, but did not cause any harm. Noting with satisfaction that the camouflage was working since they hadn't been attacked yet, the guy looked around with special attention. Feeling such a thick fog around him, consisting of a dark aura, the guy thought that this fog could be the very reason why the forest suddenly began to mutate. Having looked around, but not having sensed anything higher than E or D rank, the guy decided to move deeper into the dark territory. Walking further, Adrian saw wandering monsters behind one of the trees and carefully moved around so as not to attract their attention. And having gone even deeper, Adrian understood why the monsters were here, because something unusual appeared before his eyes. It turned out that the trunks of several black trees were intertwined together, forming something very similar to a dark altar. Looking inside, Adrian saw the body of a huge black tree at the core of the altar and branches coming from its body, turning into the trunk and, apparently, transmitting dark energy throughout the forest. Next to the huge black tree, A smaller monster was actively moving, dressed in unusual robes and covered in ritual tattoos, which, in the guy's opinion, was a priest. Hiding behind cover so as not to be noticed, the boy watched what was happening as carefully as he could, wondering what was happening, but guessing that the priest wanted to absorb the dark energy of the huge black tree. Standing proudly next to the huge ent, the priest cried out that he needed a sacrifice in order to absorb its power and finally become the king of the moss forest. Staring at what was happening in amazement, the baby quietly chattered something in his own language and did not notice how his body suddenly began to glow, because his aura began to resist the dark energy surrounding him. Feeling this, the huge ent suddenly began to move and thundered something, which attracted the attention of the crazy priest. Realizing what this meant, the priest raised his staff and cried out about the presence of an outsider, after which he summoned streams of dark energy moving at deadly speed, which began to scour the area in search of the intruder. And when they discovered him, they rushed towards Adrian, intending to capture him at the behest of their master and maybe even kill him. Realizing that he had been discovered, Adrian dispelled his camouflage aura, which immediately neutralized the priest's magic, and the guy himself gloomily noted that he could no longer count on the element of surprise. The demon priest looked at the boy with hatred and shouted loudly that anyone who interfered with his ascension must be immediately destroyed, be it people or forest spirits. After one of his commands, a whole crowd of monsters rushed at Adrian with loud screams, wanting to please their master and deal with the offender. Realizing that there was no time to waste, the guy took a fighting stance and used a flaming fist blade to quickly deal with the monsters that were interfering with him. Rushing into battle, the boy tried to keep his eyes on the priest and at the same time not lose concentration from the battle, successfully destroying every monster that was stupid enough to come within striking distance. Despite the fact that there were really a lot of enemies, the guy successfully broke through the crowd, destroying the monsters one after another in incredible combat pirouettes. And although Adrian successfully fought against these monsters, he understood that very soon his strength would begin to leave him, and any confusion could cost him his life. It was for this reason that the boy once again focused on the priest, who was shouting out instructions to his demonic ears. Remembering the old saying that if you want to kill a monster, cut off its head, the boy rushed straight towards the priest in one powerful leap, intending to finish him off with one concentrated blow. Knowing the weaknesses of different classes of creatures very well, Adrian understood that it would not be difficult to deal with the magician in close combat, and therefore rushed towards the monster even faster. Trying to get even closer, the guy suddenly noticed that the priest was not casting a spell, trying to protect himself, but was doing something that was not usually typical for magicians. Instead of using spells, the sorcerer swung his staff as if he was going to hit the guy on the head, which even confused him. Adrian was already so close that he didn't want to dodge and waste time just to reach it. But the magician's blow touched the ground, and in a powerful stream of energy shattered the stone right in the place where Adrian had just been. Landing irritably, the boy angrily noted that the strength of this magician was equal to that of a mid-ranking warrior, and therefore Adrian was forced to dodge in order to save his own life from the blow. Straightening up and taking a fighting stance, Adrian watched as the monster gestured to pull some plates that looked very much like metal towards itself. Frowning, the boy realized that the fight would be much more difficult than he had expected. Fused together with the metal plates that took the form of armor, the monster, who turned out to be both a magician and a warrior, cried out, ready to accept the fight. Hearing the priest call himself the king of the moss forest, the boy chuckled, calling his enemy's words out loud pure nonsense. Enraged by such a dismissive attitude, the magician rushed at his enemy, wanting to finish him off for the insult. And although the guy acted confidently, he knew that he would hardly be able to handle this fight, and so he took that very powerful crystal out of his pocket, intending to use it now. Realizing that he had no choice, Adrian smashed the crystal into small pieces in one motion, hoping only that he had not made a mistake in his calculations. Absorbing the released energy, Adrian met the monster that had already rushed at him, whose staff was approaching the guy's head, ready to crush him forever. The boy's eyes lit up, and he felt his spiritual energy grow even more until it finally crossed the threshold for rank promotion. And at the same moment as the guy felt his own strengthening, the sound of a powerful explosion was heard above the altar. The explosion was so powerful that solid rock formations were shattered and fragments flew away from the source of destruction. The magician, confident that his blow had reached its target, felt the full force of this explosion, was stunned by it and thrown aside by it. In turn, Adrian stood confidently on both feet, feeling how much stronger he had become and how colossal the difference was between the E and F ranks. During his rank up, Adrian had summoned a flaming blade fist in the blink of an eye and counterattacked the enemy, causing such a powerful explosion. But now, looking at his opponent sullenly, he realized that he had not killed him. Slightly hunched over and leaning on his staff, the monster coughed heavily, trying to endure the pain from the blow, but it was clear from his appearance that he was not going to die. Roaring in anger, the monster released powerful clots of dark flame from its body, wanting to finally finish off the annoying enemy. Seeing his enemy overcome with rage, Adrian stood up, ready to fight again, and smirked, noting that it would be easier for him to kill the enemy if he lost control of himself. Before the self-confident hero could blink, however, the monster appeared in the air 1 meter in front of the guy, already swinging for another powerful blow. Surprised by the speed of the monster, Adrian slipped out of the way of the attack with a smooth movement, instantly destroying the stone surface it hit. Having landed and not taking his eyes off the enemy, Adrian noted out loud that his speed had become several times greater, which meant he needed to be even more careful. Before he had time to come to his senses, he was already in the air, successfully dodging another powerful blow from the staff. Flipping in mid-air, Adrian used his flaming blade fist to deliver 3 powerful attacks at once to the enemy, who had not yet regrouped to defend himself. And although the blow clearly reached its target, Adrian was forced to dodge powerful attacks again, because his own blow could not penetrate the monster's strong defense. As Adrian prepared for another melee attack, the monster suddenly created a sphere of dark energy in his hand and took proper aim. Adrian, accustomed to close combat, was clearly surprised when a projectile flew at him and tried to dodge, but the sphere changed the direction of its flight right in the air. Scorched by the searing and poisonous dark flames, Adrian fell to the ground, struck by the unexpected attack. Falling to his knees, Adrian gritted his teeth in incredible pain as the monster said with sinister arrogance that a normal person would never be able to withstand a direct hit from dark energy. However, seeing what was happening to his enemy, the monster exclaimed in shock, realizing that his attack had not finished off the guy. Getting down on one knee, Adrian began to glow, and the flame of dark energy began to fade, suppressed by the knight's protection, which came in handy right now. As the last of the dark energy evaporated from Adrian's body, he snapped his fingers and summoned a rune circle behind him, showing the defeated enemy that his opponent was a representative of all classes at once. The monster roared with hatred and rushed forward again, shouting at Adrian that he had to die and become a sacrifice for his ascension. Thanks to the thief's agility and the knight's fortitude, Adrian successfully defended himself from all the enemy's attacks. But because of his overly strong defense, the guy himself could not inflict any damage on his opponent. Adrian glanced at his blade, which had been given to the previous soul of this body by his parents when he was 12 years old, and which was too weak to do any significant damage. Landing after another dodge, Adrian thought about another idea in his head that could work. Using magic again, the boy used the freezing cold to make the blade stronger and more powerful. Satisfied with the result of a cold-hardened ice blade, Adrian stood up again, ready to take up the fight again. Using the fist blade skill on both hands, Adrian ignited one fist and cooled the blade even more, preparing to use his entire arsenal to deal with the monster. Continuing to advance, the monster swung its staff in a bizarre trajectory, growing increasingly angry at its opponent's survivability. As the monster launched another powerful attack aimed at destroying its hated target, Adrian easily dodged it and flew past, cutting the monster's neck with his upgraded blade. At the same moment, the opened wound became covered with a strong, icy crust, causing the monster to roar in pain again. Using all the agility and speed of the thief class, Adrian flashed in the periphery of the enemy's vision, delivering slashing blows with his ice blade one after another. When Adrian was sure that a large enough area of the monster's body was covered in an icy crust, Adrian swung his fiery fist with a satisfied grin. Finding the right moment, the boy struck the back of the monster's head with one powerful attack from his flaming fist. Reacting to each other, the two elements caused a powerful explosion that tore through the monster's body, causing unbearable pain. And although the attack was not fatal, the monster was surprised to realize that its defense was broken and the wound was not healing. Having grabbed the blade more comfortably and grinned maliciously, Adrian summed up that now the fight would go much easier, and it was only a matter of time before he would finish off the hapless king of the forest. Taking a stand, he was ready not just to defend himself, but to destroy the one who, in the name of his base desires, had denigrated an entire forest and killed an entire settlement of peaceful forest spirits. In one quick dash, the boy attacked again, wounding the monster's side and preparing to carry out such an effective combination once again. Realizing that he was at a losing end, and that the battle could soon end in his own death, the monster felt real fear for the first time during the battle. Rather than attack back, the monster used its mighty strength to jump as far away from Adrian as possible, who at first thought that the enemy was running away, but it turned out that the jump had a specific purpose. The dark priest used his magic to cut through the branches that were holding the huge ent in place and unconscious, causing his eyes to suddenly glow. The awakened monster of colossal proportions roared, waking from sleep and feeling an unbearable thirst for blood. Realizing that the boy would not leave his enemy alive, the priest smirked as the huge monster strained to free itself from its bonds, and said confidently that if he was destined to die, they would die together. Adrian looked at the monster without much surprise, but he realized that the situation was desperate because the huge monster was clearly of D rank, if not stronger. Concentrating, Adrian felt how all the dark aura of the forest was concentrated in this one terrifying giant, leaving no chance for a successful fight. The enemy, in the battle with whom the guy had just had to sweat a lot, was now standing at the feet of a real colossus, whose monstrous aura alone was already terrifying, not to mention his appearance. And Adrian felt that he was really in trouble. It was a desperate situation, and although the guy was still trying to think of a way to get out of this truly tragic situation, in his heart he was ready to throw himself into a fair fight. It was at this moment that Adrian felt the previously unmanifested effect of his mythical skill, which made its owner 10 times stronger, but only on the condition that he was ready to boldly rush into battle even in the most hopeless situation. At the same time, in another part of the forest, Rebecca was sitting near a bed made for her wounded comrades, looking around to see if there was any attack and to protect them, when she felt her badge vibrate. Taking the token out of her pocket, the girl touched it with her finger, and a voice was heard from the token, announcing that a rescue team would reach them very soon. Relieved that help was close but still worried, Rebecca asked them to move faster as her comrades urgently needed medical attention. The voice from the token had already begun to respond, but it was interrupted by interference, after which the sound died down completely. Rebecca was seriously surprised because she had never heard of communication via tokens working intermittently. Hearing a sound so loud and resounding that it reminded her of thunder, the girl raised her head and saw a huge pillar of dark energy, so strong that it tore through the sky, coming from the depths of the forest. Shocked by what she saw, the girl thought in fear that this was where Adrian had gone, which meant he could be in great danger. At this time, Adrian stood in a fighting stance in front of a real titan, whose body was literally burning from the incredible amounts of dark energy permeating his body. The guy tried to keep his stance firm, but powerful gusts of wind and rock fragments forced him to move. Adrian tried to gauge its strength and understood that the monster was still a D rank, but all the dark aura of the forest flowed towards him endlessly, making him much more powerful than he was while he was inside the tree. And although Adrian knew that he would hardly survive a long battle of endurance, his spirit was captured by the anticipation of a great battle, and his heart, surrounded by a shell of mythical talent, beat faster. Adrian felt the flames of his mighty spirit engulf his body, causing no damage but amplifying all his senses tenfold. Finally, the giant moved, and, spreading his legs, swung both fists for his most powerful blow. In turn, the flame of the spirit that scorched Adrian's body had already engulfed the guy entirely, leaving him with one last hope for victory. While the demon priest laughed, standing to the side and watching the mighty titan attack the awakened one, Adrian concentrated all the power of his spirit into his body, preparing to finish off the monster with one blow. Adrian put everything on the line, because if he failed this attack, he would never leave this forest. However, everything turned out completely differently than the guy expected, which is why his face reflected an unusual surprise. The huge root attacked the demon priest with incredible speed, breaking bones with a powerful blow. The blow was so powerful that the monster flew into the rock at great speed, causing fragments of rock to rain down around it. From where the demonic priest had fallen, a weak groan was heard, full of pain and disbelief in what was happening. Due to his broken back, the priest could not stand up and was forced to lean on his hands, trembling with pain and trying to ask in a voice full of suffering how the giant could attack his kinsman. However, instead of answering, the priest, raising his gaze, saw several colossal roots falling on him at once with a speed unnatural for such sizes, which upon landing, showered the monster with a series of blows so powerful that no living creature could survive them. Adrian was honestly amazed that the situation, which seemed absolutely hopeless to him just a second ago, had changed to incredibly optimistic. When the roots stopped hitting the demon priest, his crushed body was driven a full meter into the rock. The huge giant let out a cry of rage and pain when he saw that the very monster that had enslaved him was finally dead. The colossal roots did not stop moving, because the enormous rage of the monster did not fade, and, throwing an angry glance at the crowd of black trees, the monster ordered the roots to destroy them. Just recently, Adrian himself had been saved from living roots, and now he watched with interest as they destroyed the filth that had struck this great forest. Looking at the massacre perpetrated on the monsters, the guy was amazed, realizing that he had seriously underestimated the one with whom he was going to fight to the death just a couple of minutes ago. Turning to face the giant, Adrian saw the giant take a step towards him and tensed, once again assuming a fighting stance, ready to fight. The spirit flame supported by the mythic rank skill once again engulfed Adrian's body, ready to take on the fight even after seeing the unstoppable power of this mighty forest spirit. Having prepared his blade, Adrian looked up and saw how the giant took another step forward, which meant that a fight was inevitable, and he wouldn't even be able to escape, because the roots covered almost the entire clearing. At the same moment when Adrian was ready to fight, a tree baby jumped from under his suit and right onto his head, who, looking sternly at the giant, aggressively chattered something in his language, spreading his paws as if he was protecting the guy with his body. The green energy of the forest spirit lit up in the baby's eyes, just like the time he connected his soul with the energy flowing in the small tree near the fence. Reaching out his hand to the two friends so different from each other, the giant once again revived the roots, which, like snakes, surrounded both him and Adrian with the baby. Seeing how the roots cut off any escape route, Adrian doubtfully wondered if the skill that increased his strength tenfold would help him deal with such a formidable enemy. However, the flame of the skill was extinguished in an instant as soon as Adrian saw something he didn't expect even more than an attack on the demonic priest. Stretching his arms out to the sides, the giant pierced his own body with huge living roots, which incredibly surprised the one who, just a few minutes ago, was ready to fight the Colossus to the death. As the roots crawled out of the titanic body, huge streams of dark energy began to leave his body, and small fragments of life-giving green power began to appear around him. The giant, stricken by his own attack, still stood on his strong legs, but eventually his strength left him just like the dark aura, causing the Colossus to stagger and, rolling his eyes, fall on his back, causing a sound similar in volume to a thunderclap. The streams of green energy around the giant transformed into the very same spheres of memories that the little tree had recently evoked when touching its tree. Looking into these spheres, Adrian finally learned how the filth had conquered this mighty forest, namely under the influence of that very demonic priest who had brought the dark spirits whose madness had struck the nature around. Having appeared with them in the settlement of peaceful Ents, the priest demanded that they give him their shrine, around which the settlement was built. He offered the spirits to join him in exchange for life, but the proud tree spirits responded with a menacing refusal, ready to fight for their home, family, and shrine. And although they fought with all their might, the chances were clearly not on the side of the good spirits, and therefore one of them, having found a soul that was supposed to turn into a new tree spirit, instilled it in a small tree in the hope that at least it would survive this attack. Having hidden the baby's soul, the Ent desperately rushed into battle, but after a few moments the black spirit pierced his body with its spear at the command of the demonic priest. Adrian watched with pity as the peaceful tree spirits were exterminated, realizing that it was because of this tree spirit that sacrificed itself that the baby survived the attack. Seeing what had happened, the little tree creature, who just a minute ago had been filled with the determination to protect his human comrade, began to cry bitterly. However, suddenly, from the energy of the sphere of memories, the spirit of the very same Ent who saved the baby's soul materialized, and stroking the baby on the top of his head, with a warm smile asked him not to cry and to look into the future with a smile. Turning to Adrian, the spirit smiled, but the boy saw sadness in his eyes when he asked him not to abandon the baby and to treat him with kindness. In response to the last will of the forest spirit, Adrian bowed to him, saying out loud that even though they were not people, the guy respected their dedication and courage with which they fought for their forest. While the baby was crying on top of his head, Adrian straightened up and said with all his pride that he would definitely take care of the little tree. Having heard what he so wanted to hear before his death, the spirit smiled joyfully, and a moment later his soul melted into thin air. Realizing that the dark aura no longer affected the forest, Adrian helped the tree child bury the last and bravest forest spirit. From the moment the picture of his relative's death opened before their eyes, the forest baby did not stop crying. And now he stood in front of the grave, wiping tears from his cheeks. In turn, Adrian, trying to cope with regret, turned his gaze to the sanctuary, cleansed of filth, which now looked as if it was the center of all the life force of the moss forest. Approaching the place where the demonic priest was driven into the ground by several powerful roots, Adrian noted out loud that he was not surprised by the fact that it was here that the dark energy was able to gain influence over the entire forest. Having pulled out the completely broken body of the demonic priest, Adrian noticed something very interesting with curiosity. Adrian managed to remove the helmet, bracers, and armor of the demon priest, which survived without a single scratch and could still be used in the future. Looking at the staff that the magician wielded so skillfully, Adrian thought that he himself did not need this staff, but it could be safely sold on the black market. The only problem the guy faces is the fact that he simply can't carry it all in one hand. After examining the priest once more in case he had missed something, Adrian noted with surprise that he had completely overlooked the last incredibly useful item. Noticing with satisfaction that this item would perfectly solve the problem that had arisen, Adrian picked up the priest's bandage, which conveniently contained a spatial pocket. Smiling contentedly and remembering all the items he took from the priest, Adrian placed them all inside the spatial pocket, thinking that the incredibly useful item he received was the 10 dark stones, which would help him further increase his strength. However, the most useful thing, without a doubt, was the spatial pocket itself, which you can keep for yourself and store a lot of useful items in it. The only thing that confused Adrian was that the spatial pocket was a rather rare artifact that even C-rank heroes could rarely afford, and therefore it was surprising that some demonic priest of only D rank had it. Throwing aside serious thoughts, the guy shook his head and allowed himself to relax, because just recently he thought that death awaited him, and therefore he could think about something less important, such as the fact that the bandage looked incredibly unimportant, and it would definitely need to be dealt with later. Finally, a tree baby approached Adrian, sadly hanging his head, and the guy asked him if he had said goodbye to his family. Nodding affirmatively, the forest baby jumped onto Adrian's shoulder, who smiled at the baby's willingness to move on. Having stroked the baby on the head, Adrian told him with affection in his voice that he would definitely take care of him and teach him everything that he himself knew. At the same time, Rebecca's connection was established, and a voice was heard from the token, indicating that somewhere in the forest, D-rank energy was detected, which could be very dangerous. Looking worriedly into the depths of the forest, the girl thought that Adrian had left for quite some time and still had not returned, which made the archer very worried. However, at that very moment, as if in response to her thoughts, something flashed between the trees, moving in her direction at incredible speed. Calling Adrian brother again, the girl was noticeably happy when she realized that her worries were in vain, and the boy returned without a single scratch. Blushing in front of the guy, to whom the girl had obvious interest, the girl informed him that a D-rank mutation had been spotted in the forest, to which Adrian only smiled calmly. Without thinking about the mutations, Adrian was more interested in how soon the evacuation team would arrive. Sitting down next to the sleeping squad, Adrian asked Rebecca not to forget the promise she made to him. After making sure that the girl nodded in agreement, the guy lay down next to the others, relaxed his body, and closed his eyes. Rebecca's gaze became a little worried again, and then with a sigh, she finally realized that he was trying to pretend that he had lost consciousness. At the same moment, turning towards the forest, Rebecca noticed the approach of silhouettes that turned out to be familiar to her. In front of Rebecca stood her mentor in person, in full growth, accompanied by several other awakened ones. For some reason unknown to Rebecca, the mentor, even after seeing 4 unconscious bodies, said that the most important thing was Rebecca's safety. Having ordered several people from the rescue squad to help the wounded and Rebecca get out of the forest, the guardian archer himself called those who remained behind him to find out what caused the mutation. Rebecca managed to cast a worried glance at them when the squad moved quickly between the trees and disappeared into the thicket. After some time, the rescue team and the victims reached the camp of the awakened on the outskirts of the city. As soon as the rescuers left the medical ward, leaving the wounded alone with Rebecca, Adrian opened his eyes and stood up, stretching and getting ready to leave. Rebecca tried to stop the guy and talk to him since they were alone, but she was met with an uninterested look. The boy turned around sullenly and interrupted her, telling her commander to send him the reward for exploring the forest personally. Before Rebecca could say a word in response, Adrian left, slamming the door behind him, causing the girl to grumble in displeasure, crossing her arms over her chest in an offended manner. At this time, her token suddenly vibrated, and then the mentor's voice was heard from it, asking if the archer had met other awakened ones in the forest. Embarrassed by the realization that she had to keep the guy's secret, the girl said directly that she hadn't seen anyone. In response, there was surprise in the man's voice, because the team reached the altar and saw that it had already been cleaned, and only a squad of at least D rank could do this. Rebecca frowned as she looked from the token to the door, and in her head she only wondered how Adrian had managed to cope alone, since he had only recently become awakened. Adrian himself finally reached his area, arguing that although he had quite a lot of dark crystals, he was in dire need of other resources. Warming up on the way and looking around with a smile, Adrian was pleased to note that he was able not only to successfully complete the assigned tasks, but also to better understand his abilities. Realizing how much he could do now and how powerful he had become, the guy firmly decided that he needed to learn new skills as soon as possible. Suddenly, a tree baby crawled out from under the guy's suit and started chattering something in his own language, although the guy began to understand it a little and therefore clearly understood that the baby wanted to eat. Stroking the baby's head with his finger, Adrian thought about what he was eating. However, at one point the guy saw something that could change his plans for the coming day. The familiar face of the same man who helped Darren throw the guy, in whose body Adrian now lived, out of his own house. At the administration, Adrian learned that this scoundrel was not just a lawyer, but the manager of the Awakened Society, and also that it was he who took over the management of the guy's mansion after Darren's death. Noticing Adrian, the man, whose name turned out to be Michael, turned to him with a cheeky smile, saying that it was him that the man had been waiting for. Michael sarcastically remarked that the Guardian family home was truly wonderful, and how sorry he was that Adrian had lost it, to which the boy smiled, recommending that he enjoy it while he could. And although he looked friendly on the outside, in his heart the guy despised Michael, remembering that it had been a long time since anyone had behaved so arrogantly towards him. Not wanting to communicate with the scoundrel any further, the guy went to the black market where he had originally intended to go. The first thing the guy decided was that he needed to evaluate and sell what he had received on the mission, and only then could he go shopping. On the way, the guy grabbed some food for the tree baby, but now, for some reason, he again heard a disgruntled crackling sound from under the suit. The tree crumb grimaced and spat out the pieces of burger he had bitten off, still saddened by hunger. Just in case, Adrian clarified whether the reason for the dissatisfaction was really the food, to which the little boy nodded affirmatively. Realizing that human food was not at all suitable for the baby, the guy moved through the black market to a pavilion where something suitable could be found. This pavilion also housed an item evaluation point, which was exactly what the guy needed. Adrian sighed a little sadly, seeing several long lines that he really didn't want to stand in. But there was no one near one of the doors. Surprised by such a phenomenon, the guy shrugged his shoulders and, deciding that the methods of evaluating objects were the same anyway, moved there, which greatly surprised everyone around him. The people around were whispering and laughing, noting that the guy was a real masochist if he was going to enter that point. Already holding the handle, Adrian noticed a sign on the door, which said that he would have to solve the spiritual diagram. Otherwise, he would receive 3 blows from the guard. Without the slightest bit of fear, the boy calmly opened the door and walked inside, where a strong-looking man stood at full height, wearing a comfortable-looking wide cape. Adrian realized at first glance that the man was a true professional, no lower than C rank, and this fact surprised the guy very much. The man chuckled confidently, noticing that another guy had come for a triple hit and asked Adrian if he had read the rules before entering. The man extended his hand to the side and pointed to the wall where the boy could see the star pattern itself, after which he offered Adrian to solve the pattern in order to receive the appraiser's services for free. Noting that if the guy took on the solution, it would be better to finish the job, otherwise the guard would beat him up, the man demonstratively punched his palm. Adrian didn't pay any attention to the aggressive gesture, but instead looked at the rather curious spiritual diagram on the wall. The guard said that Adrian could get out of here if he chickened out, then he wouldn't have to get his hands dirty with the guy. Shifting his gaze from the diagram to the man, Adrian smiled sarcastically and noted that the owner of this point was apparently no slouch, since he hired a mutt to do all the dirty work. Instantly grabbing the guy by the collar, the guard shouted aggressively, ready to beat the guy right now for his insolent words, but Adrian looked calm. At this time, the fair-haired girl who was behind the wall and had been bored without work listened to the men's conversation with great surprise, noticing curious details with interest. Adrian calmly said that this scheme is quite rare, and with its help, gifted awakened ones can increase their rank much more easily, but there are some features in it that are difficult to understand. With one deft movement, the guy freed himself from the grip and pushed the man's hand away from himself, noting that the cost of solving the scheme was much higher than the cost of assessing his weapon. Noting that this was too easy to understand a scam, and that the owner of this place simply did not want to pay for deciphering the scheme, Adrian chuckled, which caused the guards furious indignation. One glance at the diagram was enough for Adrian to say with certainty that the owner of this man would soon die, because when using the Stargate, a lot of spiritual energy would certainly burst out of him. At that very moment, the man rushed forward with his hand raised, intending to deliver a powerful blow to the impudent man who dared to insult his master. However, a calm and clear female voice suddenly sounded from behind the partition, calling the guard to stop. The man, taken aback by the sudden order, turned to the girl who had come out, not understanding why she had stopped him. A rather attractive blonde girl appeared in front of Adrian and turned to the guy, saying that she would be very grateful to him if Adrian would help her. The man suddenly exclaimed in surprise, asking if this impudent boy was telling the truth about the state of her health. Grinning, Adrian had already turned around and headed towards the door, only throwing out that this work was too difficult to do it on a simple request. He said that the girl could safely die if she was so greedy. But suddenly a guard appeared in front of him, abruptly closing the door and exclaiming that he was obliged to help. Realizing that he couldn't let the guy who had the power to save his mistress go, the man tensed up, ready to stop Adrian by force. Seeing the aggression, Adrian released his aura and gave the guy a hard look, asking if he really wanted to fight. Sensing such a powerful aura, the guard was clearly at a loss, not understanding how this skinny guy could be so strong. Realizing that he would never be able to cope with someone so powerful, the man bowed his head in resignation, apologizing and asking the boy with all his heart to help his mistress. Looking down at the man, Adrian took a step towards the door, saying that in this world, not everything could be solved with an apology. Holding his head proudly, the boy opened the door and walked out of the assessment point without turning around. Grinding his teeth in despair, the guard suddenly rushed forward, rolling across the floor outside the room. Seeing the man suddenly stop on his knees in front of him, Adrian just put his hands in his pockets, looking down at him as well. The astonished crowd, who had seen this man throw people out of his office many times, whispered in shock as he now loudly, his forehead pressed to the floor, begged for forgiveness. The surprise of those around knew no bounds, because they expected that it would be Adrian who would fly out of the office beaten up, but everything turned out completely differently. Suddenly, the girl came out of the office, lowering her hood and asking for forgiveness for her guard's behavior and her own. Bowing her head and pressing her hands to her body, the girl sincerely apologized again in a ringing voice. Turning to her, Adrian suddenly stopped smiling and looked at her carefully, remembering that he had already seen this girl before. He remembered the day when, in his previous life, he had spoken to a similar girl on the battlefield and heard her threaten him with a warm welcome if he showed up on her territory again. However, their relationship was very close, because in a past life she was Adrian's comrade, whose help he always valued very much. Thinking that this girl might be a descendant of his former girlfriend, Adrian asked her name. The girl bowed her head again, saying that her name was Lilia Breyer, and then again asked Adrian to heal and help with her problem. Hearing the name Breyer, Adrian was convinced that his guess was correct, and therefore looked at the girl in a completely different way. Entering inside, Adrian threw the girl his items and their list, saying that he would help her, but he would receive payment in the form of an assessment in advance. A few minutes later, while the girl was doing her business, her guard, whose name was Darius, whispered his suspicions towards Adrian because he was too young. Looking skeptically at the guard, the girl noted that only Lilia herself knew the secret of her body. And Adrian, with one glance at the diagram, described it as if he himself had seen how it manifested itself. Standing up from his chair, Darius tried to object, pointing out that the guy could be a spy. In turn, Lilia silenced him, saying that she could not allow her illness to become known outside this room, as it could undermine the authority of her family. Darius fell silent, looking down guiltily and trying to think of something to say, but the girl ended the conversation, noting that she had to take advantage of any opportunity to heal. Bowing his head in dismay, the man walked out into the corridor and stood by the door to prevent anyone from disturbing his mistress. At this time, Adrian, who did not want to delay especially, sat down on the floor opposite the girl who was also sitting and extended his hand to her, urging her to begin the process. Sighing, the girl pulled down the top of her cape, revealing her shoulders and collarbones. Embarrassed, Lily looked away, timidly asking if he could see everything, when an unusual seal lit up on her chest, which Adrian immediately began to examine. His eyes also lit up, and the magician's insight worked at 100%, allowing him to study this seal in every detail. Adrian thought about how seals like these were made for different purposes, in particular for mages whose bodies were quite weak. They often used seals to stabilize their spiritual energy so that it wouldn't escape. The seal on the girl's body looked special, and the guy, looking at Lilia gloomily for a long time, suddenly spoke. He asked if he thought the girl had the spiritual pattern inscription body, which puzzled Lilia greatly. Worried, the girl asked the guy in confusion if this was some kind of dangerous disease. The guy said that the spiritual pattern inscription body is a gold-rank talent that, unlike many others, has a small chance of appearing in mages upon reaching rank D. The amazed girl even pressed her hand to her mouth, realizing that her illness was not caused by disease or poison, but by a very powerful talent. Adrian noted that this talent is quite rare and is most often inherited from ancestors, and therefore among her relatives there must be a very powerful magician. The guy narrowed his eyes in displeasure and wondered how the girl could have never heard of this skill, since it, although rare, is truly powerful. Lily said that her grandmother and aunt were truly powerful magicians, but they died in battle with monsters and much was not made public. Hearing the girl's words, the guy suddenly became noticeably upset and looked away, sadly realizing that his good friend was dead. Squeezing his eyes in pain, the guy ordered himself not to think about those who had left and, opening his eyes, said that he would now teach Lilia one of his techniques, thanks to which she would be able to heal. In his head, the guy sadly noted that this technique was owned by her relative, which meant that he would be able to leave Lilia something very valuable that was connected to her. Bowing her head to the floor, the girl bowed again, thanking Adrian with all her heart for his generosity. Standing behind the door, Darius frowned with displeasure, trying not to listen to the women's sighs behind the wall. Sitting in the lotus position and trying her best to learn a new technique for her, Lilia had been tense for quite some time, causing her to sigh involuntarily. About an hour after she began learning the technique, a small amount of energy suddenly flowed out from Lilia's chest, forming a sphere. The tense girl didn't notice it, but the guy, surprised, recognized this sphere as the one similar to those that appear when he kills monsters. Having quickly absorbed this energy, the guy thought that her spiritual energy, due to studying the technique, began to overflow and therefore left the body. Using this energy, the boy took out one of the dark stones that he had with him and smashed it, intending to cleanse it. Usually, it takes Adrian about 5 minutes to cleanse the energy of a dark crystal, but the girl's absorbed power was so pure that it sped up the process tenfold. Adrian watched as the stone crumbled in his hand and thought that this activity could be useful not only for Lilia, but for him too. Taking all the crystals that he had with him, the guy decided to cleanse and absorb all the energy that was in them. Concentrating, the boy used one of his spirit's techniques to be able to absorb enough to raise his rank to D. Suddenly, streams of energy scratched the guy's cheek, causing him to be confused. Adrian's eyes widened in fear as he remembered that his body was still too weak to handle such an amount of energy. The guy tensely and angrily tried to withstand the streams of this powerful one, while his body was covered with more and more new wounds, which could lead to very dangerous consequences. Adrian's strength began to leave him, and it was becoming more and more difficult to withstand such pressure when he looked up. Lilia, who had been straining herself so much before, was now able to concentrate on the goal without any particular difficulty. Blushing from the tension, Adrian decided that there was no other way out, which meant he would have to take extreme measures. With his hands in a seal, the boy released his spirit to use the desired technique to its fullest. Adrian's face was already covered in small scratches, and his expression reflected his pain as he began to shape his energy for the subsequent manipulations. Realizing the difficulty of the entire upcoming operation, the guy used another technique to separate the energy flows into thin threads that could be transformed into new forms. From these threads of energy, the guy formed a new formation of an empty array, ready to absorb new properties. This array suddenly formed right in the air when Adrian used the last technique to store all the excess energy directly into the array. Finally, Adrian was able to breathe a sigh of relief as the array was absorbed into his body again, and the wounds began to heal, as all the excess energy was ultimately preserved in the array. Sighing, the guy sadly closed his eyes, scolding himself for his carelessness and realizing that he wouldn't be able to help himself in battle. Finally, Lily opened her eyes and exhaled, releasing all the tension from her body. Looking at her hands, the girl concentrated on her feelings and realized that she no longer felt any illness in them, which is why a joyful smile appeared on her face. Unable to contain her emotions, the girl rushed towards Adrian and even accidentally knocked him down, squeezing him in a tight embrace and shouting gratitude in a joyful, ringing voice. Darius, who ran in at the exclamations, was the first to shout, calling on the girl to get dressed. After some time, having heard from Lily about everything that happened in the office, Darius fell to his knees in front of Adrian. In a fit of emotion, the man pressed his forehead to the floor, shouting gratitude towards Adrian for healing his mistress and also apologizing for his own suspicion. Adrian even noted with a little surprise that Darius was even too loyal to Lilia, although the guy respected it. Sitting at the table, the guy raised his hand and firmly said that the treatment was not free, and therefore Darius had better bring him payment. The joyful man picked up the box with all the items that Adrian had asked to be appraised and placed it on the table, also indicating that his dagger had also been appraised. The guy, not without surprise, noted with approval that Darius, as a token of gratitude, even supplied him with separate tools for repairing the armor. Looking at the blade, Adrian realized that it was some kind of black branch fang, which was a bronze-ranked weapon, which wasn't very good, but in principle it suited him. Trying the blade on his hand, Adrian remembered with nostalgia how in his past life he had owned and wielded epic rank equipment. With one easy movement of his hand, Adrian collected everything else into his spatial bag. What they saw greatly surprised both Lilia and Darius, who was dumbfounded to think that even the awakened Brangus did not have such treasures. Not seeing anything unusual in his actions, Adrian asked what exactly surprised them so much. Darius immediately raised his hands, convincing the guy that they hadn't seen anything like that, and thought to himself that Adrian was truly a great man. When the guy left his new acquaintances, both Lilia and Darius bowed to him gratefully, which greatly surprised the other visitors to the appraisal bureau. As soon as Adrian left the building, everyone around him began to whisper loudly, noting with envy that the guy was being escorted by an incredible beauty. Walking through the black market, the guy smiled contentedly, realizing that he received even more for the service rendered than he planned. However, Adrian was haunted by the thought that he had forgotten something very important. And then he remembered that he wanted to look for food for the tree crumb. At that very moment, he felt something moving in his spatial pocket. Looking inside, Adrian saw the tree baby and asked in confusion why he had climbed inside. When the baby turned to face the boy, Adrian saw that the very hungry baby had drunk all the spiritual energy potions that the boy had just acquired. If Adrian could sink into the ground from disappointment, he would definitely do so, although he understood that he himself forgot to feed the baby. Arriving at the Warriors Guild, Adrian, with a gloomy face, reasoned that spiritual power potions were too expensive to buy constantly, and the baby still needed to be fed. And although the realization that the little one would ruin him in this way did not make the guy very happy, he enthusiastically found a positive in the situation, thinking that the little one would certainly grow up very strong. The guy was going to look for more tasks, but suddenly a joyful Frank appeared in front of him, saying that he had signed Adrian up for a meeting between the Warriors and Knights Guilds. And although Frank was clearly very happy to have given the boy such a gift, Adrian turned away and said that he was not interested in this initiative. He simply understood that this event of exchanging experiences between new warriors and knights would not bring him any benefit at all. The guy thought that the reward for this would be meager, but Frank silently handed him a piece of paper on which was written a reward of a whole million, as well as 10 boxes of spiritual power potions. Adrian hung there for a few seconds, just considering how great a reward this was. And when he finally realized the essence of this award, he tore the piece of paper out of Frank's hands and proudly said that he would definitely live up to his mentor's expectations and take first place. And although Adrian insisted that he would easily get first place, Frank laughed good-naturedly, saying that the guy had only recently become awakened, and therefore there was no point in counting on anything. Frank noted that there would be a lot of elite there, and he invited Adrian so that he could gain experience, although the guy himself had no doubt that he would win. As Adrian moved towards the exit, Michael and Roosevelt watched him, telling the hooded man that Adrian was the reason his brother Mark died before he could be rescued from the woods. They insisted to the man armed with a sword that the fatal wound was caused by the weapon, not the monster, and that Adrian, who had been in conflict with the knight, was the main suspect. Sighing sadly, the man stated that if Adrian really did kill Mark, then he himself was destined to die, which brought smiles to the faces of the two scoundrels. After spending a little time walking around the City of Dawn, Adrian reached the Arena of the Awakened, where the meeting between the warriors and the knights was to take place. Adrian read that this event is organized specifically between gifted awakened ones, which means that all participants there will be no lower than silver rank. Coming out to the arena, the guy looked at it and admitted that this place, built for meetings between guilds of different classes, looked truly majestic. Once again, Adrian attracted the attention of all the awakened who came to the event, who considered him a real arrogant person for his presence in the arena. After talking with the other organizers, the host announced the start of the event and said that the order of the fights was determined by the numbers on the bracelets given to the participants. To his own surprise, Adrian found himself among the first in line for the duel, and when he came out, stretching his arms, he found himself in the field of view of Rebecca and her mentor, who had come to watch the event. And although the archer's mentor said that Adrian was too arrogant for someone who had only recently awakened, Rebecca did not dare comment on his words, awkwardly looking away. Adrian bowed respectfully to his opponent, who, also bowing, sarcastically noted that the guy would be too easy a target. The slightly plump and fairly young E-rank knight stood in a stance, ready to deal with the enemy in a few seconds. However, before the knight could take a single step, Adrian's burning fist crashed into his jaw. Looking at his opponent with arrogance in his eyes, Adrian told him to shut up if he wanted to do anything in this fight. From such a powerful blow, the knight flew to the side, unable to stay on his feet. Having landed, the guy grouped himself and cleared his throat, rubbing his bruised jaw and noting that the blow was quite strong. The people around, including Roosevelt, Michael, and their comrade who had just arrived, were all greatly shocked that the newly awakened one was able to send an E-rank knight flying with one blow. Grinning in displeasure, the knight was indignant that Adrian had attacked him suddenly, and that was the only reason he had been able to hit him. Adrian, clicking his tongue and not taking his eyes off his opponent, thought that weaklings can only make excuses. Turning his head, the guy noticed that a very cruel, angry aura could be felt from the audience. Listening to his own feelings, the guy realized that one of those who radiated this aura was Michael, but Adrian did not know the second one at all. At this time, the knight rushed forward, holding his sword tightly in his hand and shouting that he would definitely deal with his opponent. Swinging his sword, the knight intercepted it with both hands and infused the power of his spiritual light into the blade, attacking Adrian. Without much effort, Adrian ignited his blade and stood in a stance, ready to meet the enemy's attack. With one deft blow, the guy hit the blade and deflected it to the side. Turning sharply, the guy swung again and gave his opponent, who hadn't managed to block him, a good hit, sending him flying for the second time. This time the blow was stronger, and so the knight flew out of the arena completely, without even having the opportunity to group himself and land successfully on his feet. Even the host's voice, previously dispassionate, sounded amazed when he announced Adrian's victory. Looking at the boy, the members of the Knights Guild became worried, whispering to each other that he was a real genius if he could become so strong so quickly. Rebecca even blushed, looking at Adrian, who confidently left the arena and thinking that he was still as powerful as the day he saved her life. Thinking that Adrian had received a golden talent that strengthened the body, the girl's mentor sternly noted that she should try to catch up with him. However, Rebecca, smiling shyly, thought to herself that she would never be able to catch up with him, but she would be glad to see his back. Putting his glass down on the table, the man in the cape said sullenly that he was now sure that it was Adrian who killed his brother. But Roosevelt and Michael did not even smile. Adrian, in turn, won again and again, always ending each fight with one blow. One of the opponents allowed himself to rush into battle without a greeting bow, clearly wanting to be the first to strike the mighty Hadrian. Taking a step to the side, a grinning Adrian allowed the impudent opponent, who had been expecting resistance, to fly out of the arena himself. As he walked down from the arena, the boy smiled smugly, enjoying the disgruntled comments of the knights who thought that the whole point was in his golden talent. Turning to the speakers, the guy sarcastically remarked that they would do well to think about why they themselves did not go for the golden talents, since they considered them dishonest. Turning away from the embarrassed knights, Adrian noted with satisfaction that he was pleased with the fact that everyone around him thought that his talent lay in strengthening his body. The host once again announced the fight, inviting Adrian and a certain Joshua Rearguard to the arena. Hearing the name, the guy noted that the name Rearguard was familiar to him, but he couldn't remember where from. Enthusiastic whispers of knights could be heard all around, discussing Joshua's person and calling him a true genius. Throwing off his cloak, Joshua gave his opponent a hard but reserved look, while those around him remembered his brother Mark. Everyone around was clearly excited about the upcoming fight, in which Adrian could finally be brought down to earth. Bowing grimly, Adrian heard someone shout a supportive comment towards Joshua, suggesting that he count the warrior's teeth. Rebecca became worried when she heard who Adrian's opponent would be, and her mentor noted, not cheerfully, that Adrian's winning streak would end there. For the first time during the event, Adrian looked serious and focused, because he understood perfectly well that it was from Joshua that this murderous aura that he felt emanated. Joshua spoke calmly to his opponent, asking if he by any chance knew his older brother Mark, with whom he had recently been in the same squad. For a second, Adrian pretended to have absolutely no idea who his opponent was talking about, and then, smiling happily, he exclaimed that he remembered that idiot who allowed the monster to swallow him and kill him. The guy's words caused real hatred, physically felt by Adrian, and Joshua furiously said that he would destroy his opponent. The knight became so angry that he caused an incredibly bright nightly glow, letting everyone around know that Joshua was not joking. And although Rebecca was clearly worried, her mentor noted with a smile that Joshua was already at the peak of E rank and would soon move up to D rank. He said that Adrian didn't stand a chance, but Rebecca was 100% sure that her brother would never let himself be defeated. Watching the start of the fight, Michael adjusted his glasses with satisfaction, noting that he could be calm and that Joshua would easily deal with the hidden threat in the form of Adrian. The boy jumped up and rushed into battle, furiously shouting that he would riddle his enemy like a sieve for the death of his brother. The attacker's eyes glowed with spiritual energy, and his hands moved at incredible speed, wielding the spear as the knight used one of his skills. Everyone around looked at this incredibly powerful attack in amazement, because Joshua attacked with his spear at such a speed that it was difficult to follow. And although the attack was truly impressive, Adrian was ready to take it and show that he himself could show class. Having noticed the very first thrust of the spear, Hadrian raised his sword and attacked himself, aiming straight at the tip. With no less impressive speed, Adrian began to swing his sword in response to Joshua's attack, hitting the tip of the spear with the tip of his sword with each thrust. Standing firmly on his strong legs, Joshua rained down a hail of lunges on his opponent, while Adrian deftly moved from side to side, catching every blow of the spear. Having abandoned his first strategy, Joshua himself began to move, cutting the air with the tip of his spear and aiming at his opponent, while the spectators noted that Adrian was even stronger than they had previously thought. Rebecca blushed and even covered her mouth as she realized how much she admired Adrian. All this time, Adrian only blocked the attacks, but at one point, noticing the opening window, the guy made a lunge which Joshua had to block, interrupting the series of attacks. Joshua, who didn't expect that he would have to defend himself from the force of the blow, even recoiled, frowningly noting that the guy's sword was really strong. Moving lightly as if he were dancing, Adrian turned after a powerful attack and thrust his blade forward, sarcastically asking if his opponent wanted a break. Twisting the spear in his hand, Joshua straightened up and asked directly how Adrian had become so strong if he had only recently awakened. However, Joshua had no intention of losing and was therefore ready to use any means necessary to win. The boy fished something small out of his pocket and put it in his mouth, intending to chew it. As soon as he did this, his eyes again lit up with spiritual energy that suddenly filled his body. In an instant, his powerful spiritual aura burst out, becoming so strong that the air around Joshua's body became hot. Adrian calmly watched the actions of his opponent, who suddenly became much stronger than he was at the beginning of the fight. Rebecca's mentor suddenly jumped up from his seat, indignantly exclaiming that Joshua had swallowed a prohibited drug that increased his strength to D rank, which meant Adrian had to be saved. Rushing forward with incredible speed, Joshua exclaimed that he was going to kill his opponent, and his aura suddenly took the form of a dragon, whose jaws were ready to close on the guy's body. The people around raised their hands, trying to protect themselves from the knight's scorching aura, and one of the spectators noted that the guy's spear was incredibly powerful. With a satisfied grin, Adrian took a stance and rushed forward, boldly asserting that such strength would not give in to Joshua. Even Rebecca, who knew how strong Adrian was, screamed in panic at him to dodge or he might get hurt. In turn, Michael grinned contentedly, glad that his enemy was so boldly rushing forward to his own death. With his feet firmly planted on the arena, the surface of which began to crumble under the mighty force of the two combatants, Adrian boldly met the tip of Joshua's spear with his blade. Adrian put all the power of his body into the blow, but the sword, which had so steadfastly withstood the knight's barrage of attacks, suddenly cracked. The force of Joshua's attack was so great that the sword split into pieces and the spear moved deeper, reaching Adrian's body. Joshua, whose blood was boiling with hatred and thirst for revenge, excitedly exclaimed that he was able to kill his enemy with one blow of his mighty spear. However, Adrian remained firmly on his feet, and Joshua suddenly realized that he could not move his spear at all. Smiling, Adrian looked up at his opponent with satisfaction, expecting to see the shock in his eyes as the tip lodged itself in the shield of spiritual energy on the warrior's chest. The guy's gaze became menacing as he calmly explained to Joshua that he knew all about his opponent's tricks and saw his pill at the beginning of the fight. Joshua, shocked and more enraged than ever, tried to pull the spear away but was unable to do so, so Adrian extended his hand forward. Seeing Adrian about to intercept the spear, Joshua tried to let go but realized that he couldn't even relax his hands. The boy's eyes lit up as he prepared to use his now spiritual energy against the knight. In an instant, a powerful aura emanated from the boy, scorching Joshua, who had no way to defend himself. Using his own spirit, Adrian used Joshua's powerful energy to absorb it and become even stronger. People around didn't understand what was happening and why Joshua, who was clearly in pain, wasn't moving. At one point, Adrian let go of the guy's spear and, deciding that he had absorbed enough, rushed to attack his opponent, who was completely unprepared to defend himself. Swinging, Adrian ignited his fists and rushed into battle at Joshua, who tried to somehow jump away but was completely unsuccessful. With proper concentration on the punch, the boy attacked Joshua, sending his opponent flying out of the arena again. The attack from both forces of Joshua and Adrian was so strong that the genius knight, unable to regroup, flew backwards into the pedestal, splitting it into pieces. Joshua immediately went limp, unconscious as everyone else, including the host and judge, rushed to him to check if the knight was dead. Michael froze in place, not understanding how Joshua, being such a strong knight, could lose to Adrian, who had only recently awakened. Relaxing and extinguishing the fire of his own spirit, Adrian put his hands in his pockets and yawned boredly, saying that the judge should make an announcement sooner rather than later. The judge harshly noted that Adrian had overdone it, to which the guy reasonably pointed out that his opponent had used a banned drug to increase strength, and Adrian himself had accidentally made a breakthrough in strength. The judge was stunned into speechlessness when he heard about the breakthrough and was once again surprised by Adrian's strength, realizing that he had reached the peak of E rank. Joshua came to his senses at the same time and, raising a furious gaze to Adrian, was about to rush back into the fight. However, feeling something strange in his chest, the guy looked down and saw a strange dent in his armor, which for some reason burned strongly. A second later, this dent suddenly exploded, piercing the armor and once again wounding the knight so beloved by everyone. The referee immediately called for a medical team to help Joshua, and Adrian grinned as he walked down from the arena, thinking to himself that the wound was not fatal. People were simply amazed because they realized that no one present would be able to defeat him. At this time, in the Warriors Guild, behind one of the doors, the sound of footsteps was heard, clearly indicating someone was rushing to leave the office. Opening the door, Frank grumbled with displeasure, saying that the guild leader had called the man to him too suddenly. And yet the warrior was going to watch the meeting of the knights and warriors. Deciding that he would at least have time to watch the end of the event, Frank quickly walked away, while at the same time Roosevelt grinned, realizing that the time had come to act. As the man hurried towards the exit, he was suddenly surrounded by several people in suits. Frank turned to Roosevelt, who had approached, and asked him directly what he needed, since the man was in a hurry to watch Hadrian fight at a meeting with the Knights Guild. Roosevelt yelled at Adrian's mentor, accusing him of sending the weak Adrian to fight against experienced knights, and because of his stupidity, the genius of the Warriors Guild was now dead. Frank's eyes widened in horror when he heard that his ward, whom he had been worried about all this time, had died because of him. Pointing to Frank, Roosevelt straightened his tie and ordered the men surrounding the man to arrest him, saying that Frank might have sent Adrian to the event for personal reasons. At the same time, a completely healthy Adrian stood next to the judge, who happily announced to everyone present that it was Adrian who had become the winner of the experience exchange meeting. People were still reeling from the realization that Adrian was so brilliant that he was able to win such an event just a month after waking up. Having received the award, the boy was quite upset, because he received much less as a prize for winning than he expected. But he reassured himself that at least there was food for the baby now. Rebecca's mentor, who had previously been ready to rush to Adrian's aid, now calmed down and said that the guy was simply amazing, and Rebecca should follow his example. And Rebecca, without taking her eyes off the guy, could only agree with her mentor, although she did not listen to him at all, occupying all her thoughts with Adrian. Suddenly, the mentor gasped, remembering the event called the Dawn Fortress, and thinking that the Warrior Guild could now, despite all the rules, appoint Adrian as a participant. And although the girl reasonably noted that he would not be allowed to do this due to his lack of experience, the mentor said that if the guy were in the Archers Guild, he would do anything to make Adrian a member. With the matter finished, Adrian heads back to the guild to return to training as soon as possible. The boy pulled out a bottle of spiritual potion from his spatial pocket to feed the tree crumb. Having accepted the treat, the baby sat down on the cork and began to drink greedily, smiling happily from the fact that he finally had a tasty meal again. Taking a look at his spatial pocket, the guy again noticed that he looked disgusting and also thought that he really wanted to surprise Frank with his victory at the event. The driver of Adrian's car turned out to be one of the guild's assistants, who asked the guy why he left the arena so early, and then suggested that it was because the event was not very exciting for Adrian. Adrian said that the meeting was over, which is why he left, to which the assistant was extremely surprised, exclaiming that the event used to go on until late at night, and then asked who the winner was. Without much enthusiasm, Adrian, propping his cheek with his hand, said that he was the winner of the event this time. Obviously not really believing the guy, the driver decided to support the joke and congratulated Adrian, thinking to himself that he should ask him to double the guy's training. Finally, they reached the guild, near the entrance of which there were surprisingly a lot of people, which surprised Adrian a little. As Adrian got closer, he noticed that most of those present were members of the City of Dawn's law enforcement group. Inside, Roosevelt was yelling at the Warriors Guild students who were defending their mentor and preventing him from being taken into custody. One of the students shouted back indignantly, pointing out that Mentor Frank had always treated geniuses with kindness, and they were simply trying to set him up. A law enforcement officer named Hans stepped forward and calmly said that Frank was only pretending to be a good guy, but in reality he was killing young people to please others. The man gave the students a calm but menacing look, and said that they had received notification of Adrian's death and had found irrefutable evidence of Frank's involvement. Frank looked at the people surrounding him, trying to take him into custody, dumbfounded, and tried to understand how his ordinary day had turned into something so incomprehensible. Turning to his students, he ordered them to leave, noting that his conscience was clear and he was ready to surrender if he received a fair decision from law enforcement officials. The warrior's disciples clenched their teeth in anger, but were forced to allow their mentor to be detained, who, looking gloomily ahead, folded his hands behind his back. Finally calming down, Roosevelt told Frank to his face that he had not set him up, and that there was indeed irrefutable evidence of Warrior's guilt. Roosevelt had already managed to relax and sigh with satisfaction, because his work for today was done. But suddenly warmth was felt from the outside. A fiery fist suddenly crashed into Roosevelt's jaw, confusing his thoughts and knocking him off his feet. The powerful blow was so strong that Roosevelt was sent flying and crashed head-on into a nearby wooden support. Falling down and spitting blood, Roosevelt cursed and, thinking it was one of Frank's students, ordered Captain Gans to arrest them all. Seeing who hit Roosevelt, Frank, like his students, opened his eyes wide in shock, not understanding how this was possible. Captain Hans, although he remained calm, was clearly no less surprised by the man who had struck than the others. Adrian, smiling cheekily and mentioning that he had not yet gotten even with Roosevelt for the last time, asked directly how he would suddenly end up dead. Frank exclaimed joyfully when he saw that his favorite student was alive and asked if he had left the event early. Captain Hans frowned a little, thinking to himself that Adrian should actually be dead by now, and Roosevelt was probably completely unreliable. Trembling with emotion, Roosevelt stood up, asking Adrian in a trembling voice how he could be alive, and then faltered mid-sentence when he began to say that Joshua must have killed him. Realizing that he had let it slip, the man covered his mouth, looking into space with a panicked look. Upon hearing Roosevelt's words, the enraged student warriors cried out, accusing the man of being the one who Everyone around began to accuse Roosevelt of being the one who tried to set up Frank's mentor. At the same time, Captain Hans, smiling, tried to cover for his wayward comrade, noting that Frank had sent Adrian to such a difficult event and therefore had hidden motives. The man noted that Adrian was lucky that he decided to leave the event early and said that they would arrest both Frank and Roosevelt, but stopped short when the guy said that the meeting was, in fact, already over. The people around were stunned into silence, wondering how the meeting could end so early, when usually it was only just beginning in earnest at this time. At this time, one of the warrior apprentices who was present at the event entered the main entrance door and joyfully exclaimed that Hadrian had won the event in just half a day. However, upon seeing law enforcement officials, the boy became agitated and fell silent, trying to ask what was going on. Everyone around screamed in amazement at the realization that Adrian had not only survived this dangerous event, but had also taken first place. Adrian said that he and his mentor had been watching Roosevelt's actions and therefore had a rough idea of what he was going to do, which meant that now was the time to settle the score. Roosevelt trembled with the realization that all his plans had collapsed, something that had seemed simply impossible to him just recently. Hammering his fist into his palm, Adrian said that Frank had suspected the man long before he gave the boy the modified skill for the gold rank. And although Adrian was going to deal with the scoundrel himself, a man from whom he himself did not expect any action suddenly rushed in front of him. Captain Hans, running forward, looked sternly at Roosevelt and was about to arrest him, saying seriously that Adrian was right and the time had come to deal with the villain. In turn, Adrian, seeing what was happening, frowned, realizing that Captain Hans would never allow the matter to end so easily. After some time, Adrian was already standing on the top floor of the guild building, frowning at what was happening below. Down there, they were taking away Adrian Roosevelt, who had been wounded after being hit, and were going to give him first aid before his arrest. Frank, who was standing next to him, urged the guy not to worry and noted that the guild director would definitely investigate everything as soon as he came out of seclusion. Suddenly, he grabbed Adrian by the shoulder, which greatly surprised the guy, who was expecting some kind of danger in his direction at any moment. Seeing the serious look of his mentor, Adrian already thought that the man was going to attack him, which the guy did not expect at all. However, Frank, having dashed the boy's expectations, laughed loudly, amazed that Adrian had not only won first place at the experience exchange event, but had also done so in just half a day. However, the man was so happy that his back suddenly started to hurt, causing Frank to cry out in pain, and Adrian noted that the man should not strain himself so much, and it would be better for him to go and rest. Hearing that Adrian was also asking for a reward, the man frowned, saying that he was too arrogant, and the reward would definitely be significant. But he should wait. Adrian honestly didn't understand what else he had to wait for, and why he still couldn't get his reward, if everyone around him was happy that he was improving the reputation of the Warriors Guild. Suddenly, a rather attractive girl named Aura, who was Frank's assistant, entered the room and brought what the man had asked to prepare. Having thanked the girl, Frank told the guy that there was no doubt in his strength, But now he had to check Adrian's spiritual strength and then tell him something very important. Opening the box, the man pointed to a glowing blue orb that was used to assess the levels and talent of awakened ones. Frank stepped aside and allowed Adrian to come over and touch the ball to make an assessment. As soon as the guy put his hand to the ball, threads of blue energy flew out of it and immediately wrapped around the guy's hand. Suddenly, the light of the ball and the energy emanating from it turned golden, which made Frank quite happy to note that the guy really did have golden talent, which couldn't help but please him. And then suddenly words flashed above the ball, saying that Adrian had already raised his level to D rank, which was quite impressive. Frank smiled in surprise, happy that his student had reached such a high level of development in such a short time, and a stunned aura whispered that the guy was a real genius. Frank raised his head and noted with a smile that Adrian was a golden talent, and even received rank D in just a month. And such excellent representatives of the Warriors Guild had not been seen for a very long time. Adrian, not at all surprised, turned his gaze to Frank and asked him in a calm voice what was so important that he wanted to talk to his student about. The man gave the boy a sly look, chuckled, and spoke with a smile and excitement in his voice, asking if he knew about the Dawn Fortress test. Adrian heard from Frank that he was now 100% sure that the guy would be able to stand up for himself, and he himself remembered that the previous owner of this body dreamed of distinguishing himself in this test. The boy also remembered that the Fortress of Dawn was a temporary gathering place created in the wasteland by the ancestors of humanity, who had gone through many murders to build the city. After the city was built, the fortress was abandoned and overrun by monsters. Adrian recalled that every 3 years, the governors of the City of Dawn held an event there for the awakened under 30 years old to honor the memory of their ancestors. The man pointed out that under the fortress there was a source of spiritual water, where one could practice and significantly improve one's powers, but only if one won the test. Frank said that this test was very dangerous, and although Adrian met all the conditions, he would be taking a big risk if he tried, but it was clear from the guy's eyes that he was not going to back down. Placing his hand on the boy's shoulder again, Frank noted that he would be happy if Adrian achieved victory. But survival was still the most important thing. In turn, the guy thought about how much he could get from the spiritual source if he won, because with its help, he could even raise his rank to C. Having agreed that Adrian would try to win, but would still focus on his own survival, Frank asked Aura to give the guy his reward for the event. It turned out that in addition to the agreed-upon money and spiritual potions, the guy was also entitled to an apartment for awakened rank C, and Frank happily handed Adrian the key to it. Adrian, delighted with such a gift, said that it was not far off until the return of the Guardian family mansion, to which Frank replied that only the head of the guild could help with this matter. Hearing that Frank knew about Michael's treachery and would do everything to help Adrian, the boy smiled and thanked his mentor for such a kind attitude. However, turning away and getting ready to leave, the guy hid his smile, thinking to himself that he had to deal with all his problems himself. After some time, the guy returned to his apartment to continue training and improving. Sweating after absorbing the energy from the last starstone, Adrian frowned and noted that after reaching D rank, the difficulty of cultivation only increased. Looking with displeasure at his hand, from which sand was falling from the starstone, Adrian stated that even several 100,000 stones were not enough for improvement. The guy's attention was suddenly drawn to the tree crumble, who raised his glowing green index finger up and said something in his own language. The guy remembered how at the event, without anyone noticing, he asked the kid to perform some manipulations on the defeated knight. Approaching the tree tiny, Adrian stroked him and praised him, once again surprised that the tree spirit had such a useful ability. Armed with a new blade, the boy changed into stylish black clothes and noted out loud that the skills of a thief and these new items could be very useful. Opening the window and concentrating on the reflexes and agility of a thief, the guy jumped out of it, intending to get to his target as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, Joshua was lying in a hospital bed, still unconscious after his crushing defeat in the fight with Adrian. Michael suddenly entered his room, accompanying an unusually tall man and a surprisingly short guy. A man named Vincent was the deputy chief of the law enforcement department, and upon seeing Joshua's wounds, he easily understood what had caused his injury. Michael said that Adrian, although strong, was still too inexperienced, which meant he needed to be destroyed as soon as possible. The man noted that very soon he would take part in testing the Dawn Fortress, and Vincent, agreeing, turned his gaze to the small guy and said that this job was just right for him. The guy in the blue jacket even chuckled, saying that killing some E-rank brat wouldn't be difficult for him. Satisfied with the answer, Vincent went to the exit, followed by the others, and the man noted that Joshua knew too much and was also disabled, which meant he had to be gotten rid of. The guy in the jacket agreed, then slammed the door behind him, leaving Joshua alone. Suddenly, something hit his head, causing the guy to wince a little, even though he was unconscious. At that very moment, his body suddenly exploded with incredible pain. His eyes flew open and his veins bulged, causing the knight to scream. Blood began to flow from his mouth as he raised his hand, crying out for help through pain and clenched teeth. Joshua reached out a shaking hand towards the window where the silhouette was visible and prayed again, trying to control the pain. Adrian, sitting on the window, smiled as he watched his former enemy suffer and asked him directly if he wanted to live. Thinking that the silhouette was just his imagination, Joshua raised his pained gaze to the ceiling and thought with incomprehension how he, being a genius knight, could die like this. However, in his soul there shone a readiness to fight for his life, and therefore he was going to endure as much as he could. Turning his head, he saw Adrian standing next to his bed, directly asking the knight if he wanted to live, which greatly surprised the latter. Smiling sarcastically, Adrian suggested that Joshua tell him everything he knew, and only in that case would the guy take pity on him, although the knight himself thought that it was just a hallucination. Joshua thought that even if it was the real Adrian, as a warrior, he would not be able to handle the C-rank poison that was killing him, although Adrian himself noted that he could neutralize it without much effort. Turning his head towards the tree tiny, who was greedily drinking another bottle of spiritual potion, Adrian brought a rag towards him. The baby grumbled something as Adrian wiped his mouth with the rag, leaving a small stain on it. Turning his head back, the guy folded the rag on Joshua's forehead, which greatly surprised the latter, who looked at Adrian with an uncomprehending look. Adrian did not explain to him that the saliva of the tree spirits contained a large amount of life-giving energy that could neutralize poison, although Joshua did not believe in such a miracle. However, raising his hand and seeing that the trembling and pain in it had subsided slightly, the guy allowed the hope of his own salvation to flare up in his mind. Adrian himself saw that the remedy worked very quickly, which meant that all those potions he drank had paid off after all. Having more or less regained his strength, Joshua asked how Adrian had learned the way to get rid of such an effective poison. To make his point, Adrian released his spirit and then threateningly told the boy that he could only temporarily rid him of the poison, and therefore he should start talking if he wanted to live. Joshua thought that Adrian's aura was even more frightening than Deputy Chief of Law Enforcement Vincent's. Putting aside his pride, the boy promised to tell Adrian everything, calling him Lord, if only he would save the knight's life. Not in a hurry to save the knight, Adrian calmly listened to everything he told him, although Joshua was getting worse with each passing second. After hearing all the details, Adrian chuckled and touched his chin with his fingers, figuring out all the details of what happened and noting that it all sounded very interesting. Joshua told everything he knew and therefore asked Adrian to save him again, to which the warrior himself noted with a smile that he would definitely keep his promise. Touching his fingers to the sick knight's forehead, Adrian sarcastically noted that before he could be saved, Joshua would have to die. After some time, the knight, wrapped in a body bag, was taken away somewhere through the corridors of the institution by a nurse. Watching from the side where Joshua was being taken, Adrian thought about everything he had heard, and in particular about the Dark Star organization. Frowning, the guy noted that these people, one of whose bosses is a certain Vincent, did everything to get rid of the parents of the previous owner of the guy's body. And although Joshua did not know the reasons for this attitude towards the Guardian family, Adrian was captivated by interest, and he was already anticipating how the day of revenge would finally come. Hiding behind the wall, the boy thought about the fact that in 4 days there would be a test of the Dawn Fortress, which meant he would be able to break through to rank C, which would help him in this task much more. After some time, something rather curious happened not far from the Fortress of Dawn itself. A genius talent of the Thieves' Guild named Pierre rushed to the Fortress of Dawn together with his mentor, who kept repeating that Pierre was a real treasure for them. The guy turned to the master and said that he was completely confident in his victory in the test, and also that he was keeping his promotion to rank C and the acquisition of a new skill a secret. To illustrate, the guy summoned a figure of beautiful pink patterns on his hand, showing how hard he had worked to shape his spiritual energy. The mentor, clearly flattering his disciple, noted that his spiritual energy formation was indeed rare, and with it, he would be able to achieve an incredible amount. The man also noted that the last person to do such a formation was the head of the Warriors Guild, to which Pierre replied that he would still show how much stronger he was than the latter. Suddenly, a powerful explosion was heard in front of the two thieves a little further in the forest, the flash of which was so strong that it reached the sky. The mentor said that most likely someone was fighting monsters there now, and therefore Pierre should be more careful, because the monsters here were at least C rank. When he suggested to the boy to go and have a look and find out if the fighter needed help, Pierre had already rushed forward. When the thieves came closer, they saw a whole pack of dead red firewolves, including the leader, which was very strange, because the leader was definitely C rank. The guy suddenly saw a running silhouette to the side and called out to the master, attracting his attention. Having looked closely at the silhouette, the mentor said that it clearly belonged to a young guy, which meant that it was most likely another one of the participants in the test. Looking at the corpses of the monsters, the boy noticed that they were killed with filigree precision, something that neither he nor anyone else from the Thieves' Guild could have done alone. Seeing that the boy felt like he was falling behind, the mentor calmly put him in his place, saying that in their business the most important thing was to be careful, which meant he needed to focus on himself. He noted that too many geniuses had died simply because they had been too hasty, to which the student bowed his head and thanked the master for the teaching, promising to be careful with this stranger. A few minutes later, Adrian, in his black robes, reached the Fortress of Dawn, cursing that he had to abandon such valuable bodies of firewolves because he was noticed. Throwing aside his irritation, the guy took off his hood and looked at the huge, majestic building standing in front of him, which turned out to be the Fortress of Dawn. Frank met his student, stepping forward and asking if everything was okay, and also offering the boy an alternative to his solo adventures to join their squad. It was clear that Frank was very worried before the guy arrived, and when Adrian asked what he was worried about, Frank said with a smile that he was worried that the guy would miss the start of the test. Adrian kindly said that the mentor shouldn't have worried, and that he was simply delayed on the road by several D-rank monsters. Looking at the guy more closely, Frank said with interest that his strength had clearly increased during the week they had not seen each other. Smiling sheepishly and scratching the back of his head, the guy said that his mentor was clearly overpraising him, although deep down he knew that he had been killing monsters all this time, and so it was no surprise that he seemed stronger. Having said that he had prepared well enough and there was no need to worry about him, Adrian asked how the master himself was feeling after that unpleasant event in the guild. Frank chuckled and said that he wasn't going to be affected by such scratches and that he was a tough enough nut to not complain. Suddenly the man tensed up and gritted his teeth and said that it was painful, but he quickly remembered that he was trying to save face and interrupted himself, noting that it wasn't painful, but just that the wound was itchy. Smiling at the man, Adrian noted to himself that his mentor Frank was indeed a stubborn warrior. Having overcome the pain, the man turned and walked toward the building, gesturing for the guy to follow. To his surprise, the boy noticed that the entire Dawn Fortress was surrounded by a protective star seal of incredible power and such enormous size that it extended across the entire territory of the ruins. Adrian noticed that there were surprisingly many awakened people in the fortress, and then asked if they were all going to participate in the test, to which Frank shook his head. The man said that the Fortress of Dawn test was held once every 3 years, and was therefore an important event that was broadcast on television for ordinary people to watch. The man tried to warn the boy one last time and told him that the monsters appearing under the Fortress of Dawn were all not lower than C rank, and therefore he should be very careful. Smiling, the guy said that Frank had already told him about this 10 times, although inside, Adrian really liked that someone was treating him so kindly. Adrian sarcastically noted that it was precisely because of his habit of talking a lot that mentor Frank never found himself a wife, to which the man became indignant and shouted that he actually cared about the guy. And although Frank feigned offense and Adrian tried to ask for forgiveness, one of the talented warriors of the guild named Vic came up and noted with a laugh that the guy was damn right. Putting his arm around the boy's shoulder, the warrior told the mentor not to worry, because he would do everything in his power to prevent Adrian from getting into trouble. Smiling, Adrian noted to himself that he really felt like he was in a family in the guild, because all of its senior members cared about him so much. Frank and Adrian moved further into the fortress, where the crumbling ruins of the architecture gave way to beautiful views and striking buildings. Suddenly, Frank's mentor's attention was drawn to a familiar voice calling the man by name. Turning around, Frank saw two stunning-looking girls from the Magic Guild, one of whom was clearly the eldest. Frank froze in place, recognizing his old friend Aurora, from whom Adrian felt an incredibly strong aura of brang. Vic whispered to the guy that Aurora was the manager of the Mages Guild, just like Frank was in the Warriors Guild, and that the girl was a brank mage, and that she and her mentor Frank had known each other since childhood. He said that the mentor had always competed with Aurora, but had long since fallen behind her, and therefore was always at a loss in her presence. And Aurora immediately asked the man how he still remained a C rank. Looking behind Frank, the woman nodded at Adrian and asked if he was the genius with the golden talent, and then reproached Frank for sending the boy to the test too early. The girl spoke sarcastically to Frank, noting that it seemed the Warriors Guild had no successor, to which Frank grinned and reasonably noted that Adrian was gaining experience here. Angry at the woman, Frank pointed to the other warriors who had arrived and proudly noted that they were the elite and would definitely surpass all the mages in the test. The woman continued to mock Frank and asked if it was their mediocrity that would crush the magicians, to which Frank angrily clenched his jaws. Smiling, Aurora proposed a bet to Frank, and Frank, in the heat of emotion, did not allow himself to disagree. Skillfully playing on the feelings of the warrior's mentor, the woman offered to supply him with a very valuable potion of Brang's spiritual power. She boldly egged Frank on, which made even his students angry, although Frank, out of spite, agreed to such a high bet. Pleased with herself, the sorceress said that the potion would go to the one whose students could pass the test better, and at the end she would definitely come for the winnings. Vit pressed his fingers to the bridge of his nose and, along with the other students, became disappointed in the teacher, because he had argued with the obvious favorites. Even Frank himself did not understand how he managed to agree to a bet with such an arrogant person, and therefore now he reproached himself for his haste. Frank was upset because Brang's spiritual power potion was his treasure, so he sadly asked his students to cope with it at all costs. Finally, the event organizer announced that the Fortress of Dawn challenge was beginning. Several magicians cast a spell and a huge portal opened in the middle of the fortress between the protected and dark parts of the building. The participants, gathering their strength, one after another began to enter the portal to begin the test in which they could die. Adrian also entered the portal and noticed that the rather intact and well-finished building here was in fact a ruin. He glanced around the huge space, inside which a powerful dark aura could be felt, and realized that it was this anomalous place that his mentor was talking about. The awakened ones around them moved towards the passages deeper into the fortress, and Vic also hastened to say that they too would go further. He noted that it would be better for the guy not to go too deep and to call for help in any unclear situation, to which Adrian agreed with a smile and asked the squad to try for the mentor. Finally, he was left alone and a bright, satisfied smile lit up his face, because he could act alone. Having made sure that no one was left, he himself moved deeper into the fortress, intending to win the test at any cost. With a serious gaze, Adrian looked around at the majestic halls surrounding him and stepped forward, intending to reach the very end. At one point, a rank E monster, similar to a fairly large hound, rushed at him. Reacting easily to the attack, Adrian extended his hand, preparing to meet the monster and counterattack. Without straining too much, with a light movement of his hand, the guy intercepted the attack and directed the monster at the floor, but with such force that the monster, falling to the ground, died immediately. Adrian recalled the conditions of the test, which clearly stated that victory in it was earned by points for killing monsters. For E-rank monsters, he only received 1 point, which meant he had to go further and find stronger monsters as soon as possible, which gave 100 points. As he moved forward, he encountered entire packs of E-rank hounds on his way, who crossed his path and clearly intended to finish him off. Frowning, the boy noted that an ordinary awakened D rank would clearly have problems in such a situation, but he was far from an ordinary awakened. Cursing, the guy ignited his fist and prepared for battle, intending to quickly deal with these creatures and go find a stronger monster. The monsters immediately rushed to attack, wanting to tear the intruder to pieces and not feeling any danger from the guy. A whole pack pounced on Adrian, their jaws threatening to close on his throat, but he didn't even worry for a second and only prepared to repel all the attacks at once. Within seconds, every single one of the pack of hounds was lying dead on the ground, and Adrian was upset because he had only just warmed up. Using his heart's skill, the boy pulled out the energy from the bodies of the slain monsters, intending to use it since they were otherwise useless to him. There were quite a lot of monsters, and therefore the guy could use their energy to form a spirit formation. Having saved this energy in a bottle, the guy put it away in his spatial pocket, once again noticing its unsightliness, to which the tree kid said in his own language that he liked it. Rolling his eyes, the boy told Tiny that the aesthetics of the Ents were somehow too outdated and promised to take up his training later, to which Tiny now rolled his eyes. Having done everything he wanted, Adrian moved further into the fortress, eagerly awaiting the chance to encounter someone truly strong. As soon as he turned the corner, his presence was noticed by the very thief whom Vincent had ordered to kill Adrian, and he smiled and rejoiced at his luck. The guy rushed after Adrian, silently warning the guy that it was his fault for his death because he had insulted the master. However, at that very moment, the thief stopped himself because he remembered that his master Vincent had given clear instructions to make Adrian's death look natural. With eyes hungry for blood, the boy remembered that on one of the fortress paths at the top there was a whole horde of monsters, and therefore he could bring them down on Adrian with the help of a special potion. Adrian opened the bottle and its contents immediately began to evaporate, causing the aroma of the potion to spread throughout the surrounding space at high speed. The guy cruelly stated that Adrian should be grateful that he would be killed with such an expensive means. Although being dead, he would no longer thank anyone. Having climbed up to the floor above, Adrian studied his surroundings without much effort, looking for those monsters for which he would receive more points. Suddenly, several blades flashed before his completely calm gaze, each of them aimed at the guy. From the darkness native to monsters, 3 armored D-rank zombies rushed at the guy, intending to destroy him. Using the fist of the fireblade, the guy, without much effort, with one powerful blow finished off all 3 monsters, sending their dead souls to another world. Smiling as he watched their bodies crumble, the boy noted that the armored zombies were even weaker than some of the awakened D-rank ones, and that was why the fight had been too easy. Turning his head, the guy noticed a whole group of living corpses, and then counted them and converted the number of zombies into points that he would receive for destroying them. Having dealt with the crowd of monsters without much difficulty, Adrian calmly moved on, thinking only that their armor could serve as good material. The guy became even more upset when he realized that there were no more monsters ahead, only a dead end, which meant he would have to go back. However, the magician's insight helped Adrian quite a bit this time, because he noticed traces on the floor left by those who had passed the test last time. The guy dropped to one knee and studied them with interest, realizing that the tracks looked quite strange. Looking closely, he noticed that right where the wall blocked his path, there was an incomplete footprint, with only a heel visible. Adrian thought that this wall must be moving somehow, since someone had passed through here, and then he smiled, realizing that this place had many secrets. For the first time in a long time, Adrian used his summoner's sense to sense every detail of the space around him. The guy looked around and saw parts of a hidden mechanism in several torches on the wall. He realized that it was enough to light the 1st, 3rd, and 5th torches for the mechanism to work. With one deft movement, the guy created a flame out of thin air which flowed to the necessary torches and lit them. Approaching the torches, the guy saw other parts of the mechanism and turned the 2nd, 4th, and 6th of them. As soon as he finished his manipulations, the sound of gears and levers could be heard in the walls, which had an effect on the mechanical door opening it. Smiling at his own ingenuity, Adrian walked forward and found himself in a surprisingly brightly lit room that stood out from the dark atmosphere of the fortress. Directly in front of Adrian in this hall, 3 unusual warriors in golden armor were lined up in a row. Adrian approached closer without fear and looked at his potential rivals with interest. After analyzing the spiritual power of these warriors, Adrian realized that they were C-rank monsters, and anyone else in his place would have despaired by now. But Adrian, standing in a stance and igniting his fist blade, prepared for battle, smilingly noting that for him this was just a light warm-up. The boy held out his free hand and beckoned them with a gesture, urging them to attack and show everything they were capable of. Suddenly, the monster's aura became much darker for some reason, and Adrian even became wary. Meanwhile, the weathered potion used by the murderer thief had already risen to the floor above, and following its victim, it moved straight into the passage that Adrian himself had opened quite recently. Keeping his stance, the boy prepared to meet the attack of one of the knights, who had already aimed the tip of his spear at Hadrian, while the other 2 surrounded the enemy. Having drawn his blade, the boy blocked 2 attacks with the blade and dodged the third, not taking his eyes off the enemies, ready for battle. Carefully analyzing the fight, the boy ignited his fist blade and, choosing the right moment, rushed into the attack. With one powerful blow, Adrian broke through the defense of one of the warriors, sending the enemy flying, and then prepared for the next attack. However, his reaction was not enough for both warriors, and he found himself open to attacks from 2 spears at once. With one precise lunge, the warriors were able to reach their target with their spears and pierce the guy's body, joyful at their own victory over the villain. However, it turned out that the warriors only penetrated a copy of Adrian, created by one of the skills that Lilia helped him acquire on the black market. Thanks to this skill, the boy was able to confuse the knights, causing them both to be open to attack again. Taking advantage of this, Adrian rushed forward and, igniting his fist blade, attacked one of the warriors, intending to finish him off as well, while the second tried to react. One powerful blow, and the second knight flew into the wall with his armor pierced, leaving his comrade alone with the uninvited guest. Suddenly, Adrian noticed something that made him distracted from the fight that was so enjoyable for the guy. The fallen knight, whose armor had a gaping hole from the guy's blow, suddenly burst into golden flames, and Adrian wondered what kind of force had resurrected the fortress knights. Thinking that the enemy was distracted, the remaining knight attacked again, intending to pierce the enemy's body through and through. But Adrian again left an illusion in his place. In the blink of an eye, the guy found himself behind his opponent, preparing to end this fight with one blow. Swinging and igniting his fist blade again, Adrian thrust it straight into the warrior's back, piercing through his armor as well. Finally, Adrian relaxed, as all 3 knights were now defeated, although for some reason they were engulfed in harmless golden flames. It turned out that this flame was there for a reason, and one of the warriors suddenly staggered to both feet. Adrian noticed that he had been careless, and the knight's serfs were not really dying, and he himself could not even restore his health. Using his special vision, the boy saw an unusual magical seal that was located on the floor of the room. After looking at it more closely, Adrian realized that this seal was a magical puppet formation, and it was for this reason that the knights did not die from his attacks. Adrian realized that those who had entered this room the last time had died and had been turned into puppets that could be resurrected to control their bodies. The guy realized that this room used to be some kind of secret treasure room, which required such a special security system, although all the treasures had long been taken out. Suddenly, the eyes of the old man's statue standing in the middle of the hall lit up, and it spoke in a booming voice, demanding that the boy get out. The guy opened his eyes in surprise and even smiled from the realization that a soul was born in this statue, and it became the spirit of a magical formation, which is why it itself became a treasure. He realized that this statue had been functioning for thousands of years, feeding on spiritual energy from an underground source, and therefore its value was indescribable. Adrian thought that in his previous life, it had taken him a lot of effort to create an 8th-level spiritual power formation, but with this statuette, it would be much easier for him to achieve that power. Realizing that he simply couldn't leave without this statuette, the guy rushed into battle, ready to destroy all the knights just to get it. Coming closer, the guy realized that the statue had protected itself with a strong barrier of light curtain, which could not be penetrated by ordinary attacks. Looking up, he saw that the statue's eyes had become more and more angry, and suddenly a loud voice began to sound from within, calling for Adrian to die. Her power was so great that monsters suddenly appeared from everywhere, whose spiritual power clearly indicated that they were all puppets of this statuette. Looking up with interest, Adrian came to the conclusion that the statue had decided to use all of its powers, which meant he would have to take a risk. The guy used his thief skill to speed up his movement, and then his mage skill to at least hold off the puppets around him for a moment. Having knocked out exactly 1 second for action, the guy rushed forward to the statuette and, thanks to the dispersal of magic, was able to break through its defense and burst inside. As soon as he penetrated the protection, his hand immediately grabbed the statuette, snatching it from the pedestal. Raising his hand with the statue, the boy loudly exclaimed that he had grabbed it when his skill stopped working and a whole horde of monsters rushed towards him, ready to tear him to pieces. Luckily, Adrian had calculated everything well enough, and so the blades, fangs, and claws froze just a couple of centimeters from his face and throat. Sighing, the boy sat down cross-legged on the stone floor, preparing to use the soul from this statue and the previously collected energy of the pack of hounds to create a high-level formation. By pouring this energy into the statue, the boy activated its magical puppet formation, intending to absorb all the power it had absorbed over the millennia. The boy's eyes lit up as he began to use one of the techniques he knew in his past life, which allowed the fusion of a powerful soul with the soul in a human's body for successful molding. Adrian thought that the ranks were used specifically for division, since ranks E through D were considered low, while ranks C and above became managers in the City of Dawn. Finally, the guy's body was enveloped in threads of golden energy, and he himself was able to create and begin creating the formation of his spiritual energy, which is used to obtain rank C and above. Sitting in the circle of the magic formation, Adrian began to modify the threads, thinking that the more patterns there were in it, the stronger the formation would be. Looking down at his hands, Adrian noticed that they were covered in slight wounds, which meant that the power of the 1,000-year-old soul contained within the statuette was too strong for his body. Suddenly, Adrian saw 2 spears aimed at his head, and so he had to briefly stop forming patterns. Easily dodging, the guy realized that his soul had already completely merged with the soul of the statuette, and therefore the knights can now control their own bodies, although they will not be resurrected again. Although the guy was even happy, because the knights could help him strengthen his body, which began to collapse from the power contained inside. Having ducked under the knight's blow, the boy turned sharply and hit his opponent in the stomach. But the force contained in his body was so great that Adrian easily sent his opponent flying. Adrian fought furiously, taking attacks from a whole horde of monsters, each of which began to move in accordance with their own desire to kill him. Smiling slyly, the guy was even glad that there were so many monsters here, no higher than D, but even several C rank. And at the very moment he prepared to attack this entire army of monsters alone, Adrian felt an explosion of all his power, which he had never expected.